listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Last year at this time, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party in the middle of a general election campaign. Today, he's been booted out, even though the national executive of the Labour Party reinstated him. Sir Keith Starmer applied the hobnail boot, showing a ruthlessness and resolve that quite escaped his predecessor, now victim, Mr. Corbyn. We'll be talking to Chris Williamson, former Labour Member of Parliament, about what next for Corbyn and for Labour. And just because it's Donald Trump that's claiming that the US elections have been interfered with, this time from within their own country, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. We'll be taking a deep dive with the legendary Max Blumenthal to this very subject. And again, asking, what next for Trump? What next for America? And in this momentous week, will Britain reach a deal with the European Union? Should Britain reach a deal with the European Union? And if we get a deal, what kind of deal? And if we don't, what happens next? And like London buses, the coronavirus vaccines are now backing up down in the street. There'll be another one along in a minute, but there's already 10 on the market. Fasten your seatbelt. This is rock and roll radio, but with pictures. It's going to be a bumpy ride. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. You can listen in perfect crystal clarity on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. Donald Trump is just settling down to watch the show, I'm sure. And you can listen on AM right across the United States from Burning City to Burning City. You can listen all over the world on the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the more than 500,000 people now watching as well as listening, then please listen to this advice. If you are watching on Facebook, either my Facebook or RT's multiple Facebook pages, please share right now with all your friends, all the people on your list. Please share so that we can spread the word of this Open University of the Airwaves as widely as possible. You can also watch on my YouTube channel. Do subscribe if you do. And on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter. You can watch on Instagram. You can even watch on Twitch. Does anybody? Please let me know if you have ever watched this show on Twitch, because I have this sneaking feeling that my clever young friends behind the glass have fooled me and that there is no such platform. But that's just me, a conspiracy theorist. This, of course, is a very important day for conspiracy theorists. Jack Kennedy was murdered in plain sight, in broad daylight, by a conspiracy, I believe. And there have been many conspiracies, like the one that murdered his brother, like the one that murdered Dr. Martin Luther King, like the one that murdered Malcolm X, like the one that got the United States more fully involved in Vietnam, and many, many others. But just because there are many conspiracy theories, it doesn't mean that everything is a conspiracy. And no doubt that will be something that comes up later, especially when we talk to the Moats medic about the coronavirus. As I said in my introduction, you wait for a vaccine and along come 5 at once. Well, actually, that's only the Chinese ones. There's 5 Chinese vaccines now being rolled out to millions of people at virtually nil cost. And we could have had them. We could have had them early. We could have had them cheap. But we preferred to wait for Big Pharma to come along, and at least 3 are on the market or will be very soon. Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and the Oxford University variant. There are at least 2, maybe 3 Russian vaccines, again being rolled out to huge populations with higher rates of efficacy and fewer instances of painful side effects than any of the others on the market. So, of course, we're not buying that one either, because we're waiting for Big Pharma. And the Jeremy Corbyn story will loom large. I think we've got a poll running on it already. Should Jeremy Corbyn quit Labour? Yes, no, or don't know yet. 753 people have already voted. It's only 6 minutes past 7. 62% say yes, he should quit. 32% say no, he shouldn't quit. And 6% say that they don't know yet. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, the plain facts are that Jeremy Corbyn has done nothing wrong. Jeremy Corbyn is not remotely, not a scintilla of his being or mind could be fairly described as anti-Semitic or racist in any other way. I have known him for fully 40 years, nearly 30 of which I sat right next to him in the House of Commons, literally right next to him. But he should have said that rather more clearly from the start. He should have rejected the idea that his support for the Palestinian people had anything whatsoever to do with anti-Semitism. But as is now famous or infamous, he decided on a different course, throwing his close friends to the wolves in the hope that the wolves would not eventually eat him. He capitulated to the idea that opposition to Israel, support for the Palestinian people was or could be anti-Semitic. The Human Rights Commission held an inquiry that he should have rejected from the beginning. He should have said, as the leader of the opposition, that this was a wholly improper use of the IHRC and that he would not be cooperating with it. But he didn't. He pledged himself in advance to accept any and all of its recommendations. He bent over backwards, to put it kindly, to cooperate with those who were engaged in an industrialized, weaponized attempt to destroy him, and with it to destroy the kind of Labour Party that he hoped to lead. I've said all this. None of this is new. When the report was released, as I said to you last week, if it had been me, I would have said nothing at all. Nothing, literally nothing. Not my business. I'm not the leader of the Labour Party. The report found, as I told you last week, two instances of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party's records. 2 out of 580,000 members. You'll get 2 of anything. In fact, you'll get more than 2 of anything else in a crowd of people that big. If I was going to say anything on background, I would have said, well, I told you so. I told you I was not anti-Semitic. I told you the Labour Party wasn't anti-Semitic. And I told you that while there were in the Labour Party, like in every other segment of society, instances, isolated, tiny numbers of people who may very well have slipped from a proper concern for the Palestinian people into anti-Jewish hatred or prejudice, which is what anti-Semitism is. And I told you there were virtually none, and there turned out to be two. That's what I would have said on background. On the record, I would have said nothing at all. But he did. What he did say had the benefit of being indisputably true. But as Ken Livingstone already found out, you can still be hanged for saying something which is indisputably true. And so, entirely predictably, Jeremy Corbyn was then hanged, even though what he said, the paragraph, the whole paragraph, not the sentence that was taken out of context, but the whole paragraph, what he said was undeniably, incontestably true. But he was immediately suspended. And then the Labour National Executive Committee, which is now controlled firmly by his successor, Sir Keith Starmer, that Corbyn brought into the shadow cabinet and gave him ever more power and influence over events, particularly over Brexit, about which more later. Sir Keith Starmer refused to accept the decision of the Labour National Executive Committee to reinstate Jeremy Corbyn into the Labour Party, and took unilaterally, illegally in my view, unconstitutionally, without a single doubt, took the whip, the Labour whip, out of Jeremy Corbyn's hands. And therefore, Corbyn now sits, as I did myself, for some years, as an independent member of Parliament. The leader of the party, less than 12 months ago, is no longer a Labour MP. The leader of the party, who scored the best election result since 1945, back in just 2017, just 3 years ago, obtaining virtually 13 million votes and coming within 3,000 votes of being the Prime Minister of Britain. That's what he did. He built the Labour Party into the biggest Labour Party anywhere in the Western world, and now he's been kicked out of it. Well, as someone myself who served 36 years in the Labour Party and was expelled in less than 36 seconds by Tony Blair and his factotums, I know what that feels like. But there must come a point at which it is obvious to people that supported Jeremy Corbyn that the Labour Party is no longer a party for them, that the only future they can look forward to is unrelenting class struggle inside the Labour Party against other Labour Party members. Who wants to spend their life in that way? Isn't there enough to do outside, in the streets, amongst the population, amongst the working class of Britain? Isn't there enough fights to be fought against people that are officially your enemy, rather than spending your life unrelentingly fighting people inside your own party? That's the mother of the poll that I have put out now. Get your votes in now. There must come a point, and surely this is the point. If it wasn't before, surely this is the point at which people say, this far but no further. We have a world to win, and we can't be spending our life trying to win a Labour Party that has proved unreformable, that has proved unchangeable because of its history and because of the architecture of the party. The Labour MPs run the Labour Party. They always have. And Corbyn, when he had the chance, didn't break that power, overweening, monopolistic power of the members of Parliament. I was one for many years. Nearly 20 years I was a Labour member of Parliament. It's the most uncollegiate, the most unfriendly, the most rancid place that I have ever operated, the Parliamentary Labour Party. It's over. That's my view. We'll see if Chris Williamson agrees. He was Jeremy Corbyn's biggest supporter. He tramped the whole country supporting Jeremy Corbyn, and when the wolves came for him, Jeremy Corbyn turned his back, turned his face away, as he did to me, and as he did to Livingston, and as he did to Jackie Walker, and as he did to Mark Wadsworth, and as he did to thousands of others who supported him. But that notwithstanding, I can promise Jeremy Corbyn the warmest of welcomes, a prodigal returning, should he leave the Labour Party and rejoin the socialist movement in the country and in the world. What do you think? Should he quit? A, yes. B, no. C, don't know yet. If your answer is don't know yet, maybe you can tell us what would need to happen before you would make a judgment call on that question. I'm running out of time, so quickly. As I said in the introduction, just because it's Donald Trump that's claiming that the Democrats are riggers, it doesn't mean it isn't true. Tammany Hall is Tammany Hall for a reason. The Democratic Party in the great cities of America is the very personification of a corrupt political machine. Are they corrupt enough? Are they clever enough to rig the vote in Philadelphia, PA? You bet they are. Did they is another matter. And could you prove it? Another matter altogether. We'll be asking the legend that is Max Blumenthal, pure royalty if the Americans had any, on the American left, the finest investigator, reporter and commentator on the left of politics in America. We'll be asking him these very questions. And what about Brexit? We're going to do a deal this week. If we are, what kind of deal? And if we don't, what happens after that? And the coronavirus, well, as I said, I'm just waiting for my vaccine. Are you? It's all coming up over the next 2.5 hours or more on the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Pizza Express Woking. What is it you want? Oh, you want an ill-advised interview on the BBC? A cheese pizza, extra immature, and a raw bailout. No, we don't take taxpayers' money. Yeah, but we do take contactless. Would you like a receipt for that, Mr. Prince?
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The polls going great guns. Nearly 1,000 people have voted already. Should Jeremy Corbyn quit Labour? Yes, 63%, up 1. No, 31%, down 1. Don't know yet, still at 6%. 943 people have voted. Max Blumenthal is the editor of The Grey Zone, and I've already given him the most fulsome of introductions, so let me join him now. Max, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Been a little while since we saw you. Very good to see you again.
You.
Tell us, first of all, please, what's the atmosphere in DC right now? Is it feverish? Are people still thinking there's something to play for in these games that Trump is involved in? Or is this just all going through the motions?
Well, it's certainly not going through the motions. I would say about a week ago, there was some tension in the city. Many people wondering, Republican and Democratic insiders wondering if Trump was going to play this out all the way to Biden's inauguration. And there was talk of a coup. And then the Trump legal team came out with its argument 2 days ago that the Venezuelan government, run by the late Hugo Chavez, working through a front company, had hacked into the voting machines across America and installed software that allowed the Biden campaign, not exactly a friend of Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan government, to manipulate vote totals and allow Biden to win at the last moment. And this was put on display at the Republican National Committee here in Washington at a press conference filled with reporters and filled with people spreading COVID, including, I think, Rudy Giuliani's son. And so Rudy Giuliani gets up, offers this argument while hair dye is dripping down his sweating face. He appears to a melting wax museum sculpture from some disturbing grotesque gallery. And then Sidney Powell, who is the super lawyer taking this on, who was Michael Flynn's lawyer, the former national security advisor to Trump, who faced all sorts of legal problems, presents the argument that the communists have stolen the election for Biden in a thick Southern accent. And I can say it didn't exactly go over very well. Chris Christie, who was a close Trump ally, the former governor of New Jersey, a Trump proxy in 2016, has mocked Trump's legal team, said they're a national embarrassment. Tucker Carlson, who is the Fox News host, who has been the closest Trump ally for the past 4 years, has basically challenged Sidney Powell and Giuliani to produce one piece of evidence backing up their claims, and they haven't come forward with it. And so basically we're watching the final denouement of the Trump era, which is this sort of various anti-communist meltdown happen in real time. And Washington has kind of become the atmosphere is sort of lifted a little bit, and it's become sort of not, I wouldn't say jubilation, but there's a lot of mockery and delight in the air.
It definitely was peak Trump. The lawyer Sidney, her in that drawl that you mentioned, it was straight out of the McCarthy era, just not as convincing. She seemed to think that Hugo Chavez was still in power in Venezuela. The tenses she was using were wrong otherwise. She also claimed that Hugo Chavez had hired these people after he had lost a referendum vote, which he had in fact actually won. But all that notwithstanding, if you can bear to put that to one side, it's a lot to put to one side, I know. Not least Giuliani, who'd obviously bought something in the Four Seasons Garden Centre and plastered it over his head, which was then all dripping down his face. But if you could put that to one side, it's not fantastic, is it, that the Democrats would rig elections? After all, they rigged their own primary elections, and Tammany Hall was Tammany Hall for a reason.
Well, what's being alleged is devoid of evidence. So what can I say? Sure, it would be possible to Carlson has said that what Sidney Powell has alleged would be the greatest crime in American history. I don't know about that, but it would be up there. It would be, high on the list of crimes, just the theft of a presidential election. And so they had better come forward with the evidence. But at this point, there isn't any. There have been recounts, several of the key swing states, hand recounts, and they're not finding that there was some massive irregularity in vote total. So maybe it happened. I didn't see the evidence. I know in 2000, the election was stolen for George W. Bush. The recount was stopped as it was trending in the direction of Al Gore. And the Supreme Court, by a 5 decision with 5 partisan Republicans, stopped the vote and allowed George W. Bush to win. And then Al Gore just whimpered away, which is sort of what everyone's hoped Donald Trump would do. What I would say is that where the Democrats have really gone wrong here and helped create this situation is by trying to delegitimize Trump as a Russian asset who has been colluding with Vladimir Putin. And it's pretty obvious, and CNN reported this, but it's been pretty obvious to me from the beginning, with Trump refusing to respect the election results, that he was just trying to get revenge for the fact that Hillary Clinton and, her former CIA allies like John Brennan and James Clapper, these characters, never accepted his fair and square, free and fair victory in 2016 and attempted to paint him as a tool of Vladimir Putin. Hillary Clinton called him an illegitimate president. And so it's this kind of zero-sum game that's playing out in American politics that really reminds me a lot of the kind of regime change plotting that the U.S. does abroad that increasingly defines our elections and will, I think, for a generation to come.
Well, let's rejoice that Joe Biden is going to be having an inauguration. How is it taking shape? His cabinet, his team, national security team, foreign affairs, the Treasury, and so on. It looks to me like not so much a Wall Street administration as a Silicon Valley administration. All these geeks that lord it over us on social media seem to be well dug in the incoming Biden administration.
Absolutely. And first, let me say that there's a giant kind of grift taking place where the Trump administration is refusing to assist with the Biden transition by refusing to respect the results of the election. And so the Biden team has gone online and is trying to raise money from people who are all losing their jobs in the middle of a pandemic. There's no stimulus money going to the public, and they're asking them to help pay for their transition to raise $90 million. Wow. And I feel like with all of the Wall Street allies and the $1 billion that Biden raised and all these wealthy Republicans that helped Biden win, I feel like they could ask them instead of, people who are driving Uber and working at donuts to make a living. But to your question, Silicon Valley is going to play an unprecedented role or have an unprecedented influence in a Biden administration. That's already clear. You look at the personnel on the agency review teams and you see not just arms industry funded think tanks employing those who will direct the foreign policy team of the Biden administration, but also Amazon, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Salesforce. These are all people who are represented on the agency review teams. And Eric Schmidt is a really key figure here. He's the CEO of Google. And according to the Financial Times, he's likely to play a leading role in a Biden administration. Eric Schmidt, it was just revealed, has reaped a multi-billion-dollar contract with the CIA. Eric Schmidt was on a board at the Pentagon, the Defense Department, to provide kind of a bridge to the tech community. He basically exists along with Jeff Bezos at Amazon, who's just is opening up an Amazon super center near me in Northern Virginia, right near the Pentagon and Langley. They kind of exist as a revolving door or a nexus between the military, the so-called intelligence community, and the tech world. And they played a major role in helping to elect Biden. In the days ahead of the election, there were messages on Google and all the major social media platforms that push people to get out there and vote, kind of like we were in the midst of a color revolution or something. Everyone was on board with this vote message. So absolutely, Eric Schmidt is someone to watch, and he's funded the Democratic Party's infrastructure over the years as well. This is also Payback, one of the major Democratic or Clinton-oriented think tanks here in town in Washington. The New America Foundation is substantially funded by Eric Schmidt and Google.
And what does that portend for people like you and me who depend on these tech platforms to get our messages across? Like this interview this evening, for example. What might that portend?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first of all, there's a certain hypocrisy there because, I pay a substantial portion of my modest income to the federal government in taxes. Eric Schmidt won't pay any. He just got citizenship in Cyprus, so he can offshore all his accounts. So this is the new oligarchy, these new robber barons, and they're really setting the agenda. The Democrats are insistent, though, that there was just a very stormy hearing here on Capitol Hill before the Senate, where Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, who is the CEO of Twitter, were hauled in, and they were basically dressed down for failing to tamp down on so-called disinformation. From the point of view of the Senate Democrats, that's ads for the Trump administration, QAnon, conspiracism that leads people into these kind of cul-de-sac of conspiracy thinking that also push them into right-wing politics, and they want to tamp down on that. But the way they define disinformation increasingly means anything they don't like, including what contravenes the imperatives of their foreign policy positions. And so at the Gray Zone, the publication that I edit, we've faced throttling for sure on Google. There was a period of about a year where we were unable to search for our own articles inside the United States on Google. We were obviously on some kind of blacklist, and when we would go abroad to Central America, for example, we would easily find our material. Wikipedia, through basically a campaign by neoconservative editors and right-wing Latin American editors who don't like our material on Venezuela, our factual reporting, have gotten us listed as a deprecated source, along with the network that you're currently on, along with Telesur and other important counter-hegemonic networks. So we can see it happening in real time, and we recently reported at the Gray Zone that the Biden appointee for the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which governs all of the media that the U.S. government, the state media that it broadcasts internationally, Voice of America, Radio Marti, Radio Free Asia, is Richard Stengel, someone who has openly called himself the chief propagandist of the U.S. government and said that the First Amendment has to be limited in order to prevent what he calls disinformation. And it was Stengel actually who created the official propaganda wing of the U.S. State Department, the Global Engagement Center, under his watch in the Obama administration. So I think we're not just going to see throttling, suppression, and censorship of alternative media. We're also going to see unprecedented state propaganda disguised as organic media.
Yes, although how could we tell the difference might be a dilemma, because when you see what the journalists unbribed will do, you might conclude there's no reason to. Who's going to be for it, and who might get a break in the Biden foreign policy arena? Let me take a guess. A bit less punishment to Iran, a bit more punishment to Syria, a bit less to China, and a bit more to Russia. Have you been doing any calculations on this?
No, I agree with your estimation. I think, personnel does matter, but there is a general direction that a democratic foreign policy tends to take. and it's towards containment of Iran through negotiation, rejoining the Iran deal. However, a close ally of Joe Biden, Biden's increasingly kind of politically and intellectually checked out, is his colleague in Delaware in the Senate, Chris Coons, who is an absolute tool of AIPAC, the key arm of the Israel lobby, and he's a major contender for Secretary of State. And Coons has said that the U.S. will not re-enter the Iran deal without renegotiation on ballistic missiles and so-called Iranian proxies, who really represent Iranian key allies like Hezbollah, like certain militias that are active in Iraq. And this is non-negotiable. This is a red line for Iran. So what Coons is doing is sort of offering another recipe for the kind of maximum pressure policy that Trump is applying. So it would be very dangerous if someone like him entered the Biden administration. Then you have Susan Rice, who's another option, was a key figure in the destruction of Libya. I tweeted out a clip of her from a talk she gave last year, I think, or 2 years ago when she was on book tour, where she was boasting about how she was the only person in a White House meeting pushing for the bombing of Syria in 2013 without congressional approval. She wanted the president to rush a bombing campaign into Syria, and she even left out the possibility Iran would join the battle, and so she wanted the president to prepare for war with Iran. I mean, this is a fanatic who has been wrong consistently. I don't think she'll make it through a confirmation process because of her role in Benghazi, because of her role in unmasking Trump officials. So that leaves Blinken for Secretary of State, longtime advisor of Biden, has been for every war since Yugoslavia. Definitely favors re-entering an Iran deal, but there's a certain inertia to change with the Democrats and doing so in a more smart, sophisticated, high-tech fashion and working through alliances. And then Secretary of Defense, it appears inevitable that it will be the first female defense secretary, Michelle Flournoy, who worked with Tony Blinken at this legally correct consulting firm called West Exec Advisors, which basically helped big tech firms in Silicon Valley reap contracts with the Pentagon. And that's what they're going to do in the Pentagon. Michelle Flournoy is someone who actually wrote a paper on preventing war with China that was basically a recipe for preparing for war with China. So, yeah, there's going to be a hardline China. There's going to be a lot of inertia towards a hardline containment policy against China and a ramping up of the new Cold War, but in a more sophisticated fashion with multilateral alliances, which in some ways is more insidious and dangerous than the clumsy, ham-handed approach that the Trump administration has taken.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, Max, can Donald Trump do a Grover Cleveland? Can he come back?
To me, it seems almost it's hard to imagine, but to me, it seems like Donald Trump will just maintain this presence over the Republican Party and will have virtually veto power over any future candidate because Donald Trump commands a movement that exists within and outside or without the Republican Party. He has brought in so many males who previously didn't vote, who are not college educated, who are really disgusted in the direction the country is going, and engaged them not just in politics, but in political culture in a way that no other Republican candidate has or could do. And so I'm looking at a figure like Mike Pompeo, who was Trump's Secretary of State and who managed to survive all of the purges of the Trump administration. I mean, Trump has had more defense secretaries than any other president. Pompeo was also inside the CIA. He built up a lot of power. He has the Koch brothers had traditionally backed him. He has support of the Christian right. And now he has the Trump movement because he survived the whole Trump administration as a loyal ally of Trump. So I could see someone like him running in 2024, and he's arguably more dangerous than Donald Trump because he is just a pure, unalloyed war hawk in the back pocket of Benjamin Netanyahu. He played a key role in pushing Donald Trump to authorize the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, as Gareth Porter reported for us. So I think Trump will be there whether he runs or not as kind of the real boss of the GOP.
boss of bosses. Max Blumenthal, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. It's
Thanks a lot, George.
Been a terrific interview. Should Jeremy Corbyn quit Labour? Yes, 62, no, 31, C, don't know yet, up 1, up to 7%. Now, I did my RT short on this very subject. Take a look at it. If Sir Keith Starmer, when he was running to become the leader of the Labour Party, had told the members that less than 1 year later he'd be expelling Jeremy Corbyn from their ranks, I wonder if he would have won. This is a quite extraordinary turn of events. Of course, many important people have been expelled from the Labour Party, including me, but greater eminences than I, like Nye Bevan, like Michael Foot and others, have been temporarily expelled from the Labour Party. But never in Labour movement history has a man who was the leader less than a year ago and took the party into a general election been expelled from the ranks. Illegally, in my view, certainly unconstitutionally, but I'm not sure that Jeremy Corbyn has within him the willingness to take this through the courts or to take it anywhere at all, quite frankly. It is the culmination of a remarkable turn of events. Jeremy Corbyn, a left-wing leader for decades, a leader of the Brexit cause for decades, long before the term Brexit had ever been coined, ended up being the man in charge of a party dedicated to wrecking Brexit and abandoning a great many of the sinews of his own career, like the Palestinian issue, for example. A fat lot of good it did him. Labour went down to a crushing defeat in the general election of 2019, and the people to whom he capitulated over Palestine are now demanding his head on a platter. And now he's out. So what next for Jeremy Corbyn? What next for his hundreds of thousands, presumably, of supporters? Well, nothing much, it seems. Not a single Labour MP has resigned the Labour whip in order to sit down beside Jeremy Corbyn, even though they were on his coattails for almost 5 years. And the same thing is now happening to Donald Trump in the United States. One by one, his Senate and congressional allies are jumping ship and abandoning his hope of restaging the presidential election, having the result overturned. Soon, there will just be Trump and presumably his lawyer and definitely his family. Will that be the end of Donald Trump? I don't think so. I think he's positioning himself for a Grover Cleveland, the only man ever to be re-elected as President of the United States, with one presidential term in between. I think that Donald Trump, if God spares him, and if he loses a few pounds, maybe goes horse riding bare-chested like President Putin, will be back. He'll run in 2024 as the man who was robbed. And if not Trump, then one of his children. It's not over yet for Donald Trump. I fear it's over for Jeremy Corbyn. Well, we'll see if I'm right about that. But truthfully, there's no point in following leaders, as Bob Dylan once told you in the only song he ever made that made it to the top of the hit parade. Don't follow leaders, he said. You have to follow principles. You have to follow that in which you believe. And if the people that you're following no longer hold those principles or are not ready to fight and, if necessary, fall for them, then really, what's the point? That's my view. I still believe in everything I ever believed in. And I can say that I stood by those beliefs. Unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn, God bless his cotton socks, will not be able to say the same.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
Blimey, it turns out half the country's on Twitch. Some of my best friends, like Scouser Lar, are actually watching this on Twitch right now. That's what happens as you get older. You no longer know who the Beatles are, or the 2020 equivalent of that. Everybody knows who Chris Williamson is. As I said earlier, not only was he an outstanding member of Parliament and an outstanding supporter of Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament, the more outstanding because of the flatness of the surrounding landscape. There weren't many disciples of JC going around the country at their own expense, wearing out their own shoe leather, proselytizing his message. Not that that helped him much when the wolves descended upon him. He's now outside of Parliament, outside of the Labour Party, and reportedly seeking to create a new party of the left. It's good that he's joining us at any time. It's particularly apposite on the first Sunday after Jeremy Corbyn's latest defenestration. Chris Williamson, thank you very much for joining us. Were you shocked at what happened this week to Mr. Corbyn?
No, not really, George. I predicted it, in fact, and I indeed was took out a speech actually from about 3 years ago where I made that very point that it's not really me that they're after, or Ken Livingstone, or Jackie Walker, Mark Wadsworth, or the hundreds or thousands of grassroots members that had been thrown under the bus. Ultimately, what they were about, the enemies of Jeremy Corbyn, were to topple him and to destroy any semblance of a socialist programme within the Labour Party. And what is happening to Jeremy now is in very many ways similar to what happened to me. If you remember, I was suspended, then I was readmitted to the party following a panel of the National Executive Committee who met and went through the accusations and decided to reinstate me. Within 48 hours, had been resuspended, but this followed an outpouring of opposition from the large proportion, anyway, of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Over 100 Labour MPs and around 50 Labour peers had signed a motion to go to the next Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, calling for the whip to be withdrawn for a year from me and for an inquiry to be mounted into how it was that I was reinstated in the first place. And the hyperbole was so intense that the General Secretary decided to resuspend me, and that was then endorsed by the National Executive Committee. And then, as you may remember, George, I took the Labour Party to the High Court and defeated them in the High Court. Actually, they tried 3 times prior to the High Court hearing to get the hearing delayed. I was calling for an expedited hearing on the grounds that there was likely to be an early election. What their lawyers were arguing in court in 3 preliminary hearings was that there's no evidence that there's going to be a general election. We have a fixed-term parliament now, and Mr. Williamson is merely speculating. Obviously, the judge threw it out on each occasion, and on the third occasion, they didn't just throw that out. They actually set a date for the hearing to take place. Within 36 hours, I received a new communication from the party. When I first saw it, I thought they'd seen sense and were going to pull back from the brink, but no, it was to issue me with a third suspension, to say, we know you're already suspended, but irrespective of the outcome of that suspension, you will remain suspended because there are these additional new allegations, which are even more preposterous than the first ones. I mean, they included things like, for example, sharing a video of Norman Finkelstein, an acclaimed Jewish academic. And another accusation was that I told people to pipe down. That was deemed to be some sort of anti-Semitic trope, and that was in relation to criticism that was being levelled against me for attending the Labour, or planning to attend the Labour Party conference in 2019. And I was contacted by media hacks and said, there's a lot of criticism, are you coming to the conference? And I said, yes, I am. I'm going to be speaking at a range of different fringe meetings. And these characters need to pipe down, get behind the leader, focus on attacking the Tories, exposing the Tories, and working for a Labour victory at the next election. And that was deemed to be beyond the pale. So it didn't surprise me that they weren't going to accept Jeremy's reinstatement into the party. And frankly, I think, as your poll is suggesting, Jeremy's best move now, frankly, would be to leave the Labour Party and help us together to, build an alternative movement outside of the Labour Party, because the Labour Party is well and truly broken. It really is. And I think our job now is to bury it.
Well, I mean, as you describe it, particularly to the international audience, it does beg the question. In fact, it screams the question. Why did we all spend so much time in this morass, in this labyrinthine, constant, never-ending internal struggle? It's a bit of a waste of time. I wasted 36 years. You wasted a lot of decades also. It's overdue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, 44 years I was in the party. I was talking to an old comrade of mine who's similarly been in the party, has now left it. He'd also been in 44 years. And, you take his membership, his combined membership, my membership, your membership, George, it's well over a century's worth of membership of the Labour Party. But if you think about it, in a cold light of day, the Labour Party in reality, ever since it was founded, or not long after it was founded, has been used as a tool of the establishment to maintain the status quo. Even that 1945 Labour government, I think, was really a hangover from the need to work collectively after the Second World War. And it's important to remember, whilst there were some wonderful changes that were brought about in terms of the policy, the social policy that was brought in, the introduction of the National Health Service, the welfare state, and million homes, council homes and so on being built. It was wonderful, and the post-war consensus was created, which stood the test of time for 34 years until Thatcher came along, although in reality it was Dennis Healey that broke it when he went to the IMF. But that was still a very imperialist government, wasn't it? Getting involved in foreign wars, the Korean War, for example, and still Britain's involvement around the world was pretty significant. And I believe we even had a colonial secretary, I think, in the government, didn't we? In many ways, I think now we do need to break out. I mean, I stuck with the party all those years. It does feel like a waste now in many ways, although I think we did achieve some good things at a local level when I was the council leader in Derby, and we did our best. And Tony Benn used to talk about the Labour Party needing two wings, a right wing and a left wing, to be able to fly. But the truth is, the right wing isn't interested in having a left wing, and I think this notion of a broad church is now well and truly over. And they're not interested, frankly, in having a sort of a left wing, as it was, progressive left wing. The socialism is a dirty word. And, they've used the calumny of anti-Semitism as they stick. And I've got to say, unfortunately, the advice that Jeremy received to try to appease these people, to treat them as if they were making these accusations in good faith, played into their hands. I mean, and I made this point to Jeremy, I made this point to the Socialist Campaign Group, that we needed to draw a line in the sand. We have to stand up for the Labour Party's reputation, stand up for Jeremy's reputation, stand up for our own reputation as long-standing anti-racist campaigners. And all we're doing by giving ground in this way is feeding the beast. And all we're going to do, as I was saying earlier, George, is make it stronger. And all we're going to do, therefore, is give them the strength to ultimately topple this project. And I'd hoped that we could democratise the Labour Party, and I, as you mentioned, went on a tour of the country promoting the democratisation agenda, promoting the socialist agenda that Jeremy was leading us on, with a view to not just simply to democratise the party for its own sake, but Tony Benn once said again that we need to democratise our party in order to democratise society. So it was a means to an end, but unfortunately, we were undone, I regret to say, by Len McCluskey at the Labour Party conference in 2018, when he led his delegation to vote against his own union's policy on open selections, mandatory selections of Labour MPs. And one of the points I was making, but to Jeremy, actually, and to the Socialist Campaign Group, and this is common sense, it's not sort of any great kind of political soothsayer or anything like that, George, but I was making the point that, look, unless we get these democracy reforms through, unless we make these Labour MPs accountable to our grassroots and respect the socialist agenda, modest socialist agenda that we are now seeking to pursue, they will sabotage a Corbyn-led Labour government if we get into power. And that will be enormously damaging and will create cynicism at a level we've not yet seen in politics, because so much hope and expectation would have been invested in a Corbyn-led Labour government. To then see it dashed at the when we got into office would be just unconscionable. But unfortunately, no, my sort of exhortations were ignored, and I wasn't the only one. And the rest is history. I mean, the absurdity of adopting a commitment to a second referendum and saying that we were going to campaign for Remain absolutely was just signing a suicide note. And my argument again on that was at the PLP meeting, got shouted down for my troubles, was to say, look, we're going to leave the European Union. That's what the people have voted for. We campaigned, many of us, for Remain, but we lost. Now what we should be arguing is for the type of vision that we have for Britain outside the European Union. And irrespective of whether we're in the European Union or outside the European Union, whether we leave with or without a deal, the economy is going to continue to grow. And what we therefore need to be doing is, with a currency issuing nation as we are, is to say we will deal with any economic shock through a big fiscal stimulus, but we'll also commit to a genuine redistribution of income and wealth. And even if the economy, which it wouldn't do if you invested with a big fiscal stimulus, but even let's take for argument's sake the economy were to shrink slightly. If you were to redistribute income and wealth, then you could lift the living standards of the 99%. The fact that Britain's the fifth biggest economy, gross domestic product, is a very imperfect measure of economic success, because fifth biggest economy, we've got people dying, literally dying on the steps of rough sleepers, dying on the steps of the mother of Parliament in Westminster. We've got 14 million people living in poverty. We've got millions of people in precarious employment. Clearly, this economy isn't working. And that's what we should have been arguing for. So I was saying, look, let's argue for a people's Brexit. Let's say to the Tories, we will get Brexit done. Yes, the Tories are saying they'll get Brexit done, but they're going to deliver a banker's Brexit. We'll deliver a people's Brexit. We'll deliver a Brexit that actually works in the interests of the 99%. And frankly, I think we could have won that argument. I think Jeremy would have now been in 10 Downing Street. I would have still been a Labour MP, I'd like to think. And we'd have been transforming the country. But as it is, the Corbyn project has been utterly destroyed inside the Labour Party. The Labour Party is no longer a vehicle which is fit for purpose, certainly not fit to deliver any form of modest socialism. And therefore, I think we absolutely need to start again. We need to build a social movement, and we need an alternative electoral vehicle. And I think what we need, and I know you've established the Workers' Party, George, and there are other political parties, and I think we've got to find a way, those of us who believe in an alternative vision for Britain, of actually, settling our differences and working collaboratively together. If we do that, then I think we've got a fighting chance of replacing the Labour Party. It's been done before. Let's remember it was a political duopoly until the Labour Party was formed between the Liberals and the Tories, and Labour replaced the Liberals. And so it can be done, and it's been achieved in other parts of the world as well. So I think we need to be brave, and we need to be clear that solidarity is the key, and if we stand together, if we work together, if we apply that Labour movement maxim, that unity is strength, then I think it's all to play for.
All that remains then is for me to ask you, do you think Jeremy Corbyn will quit the Labour Party?
Well, it's a hard one. I mean, frankly, I'm not sure that he will. I mean, Jeremy's been committed to the Labour Party, and I understand that. Look, I mean, I stuck with the Labour Party. I mean, as you did yourself, George. Even during the dark years of Kinnock and the earlier part of Blair, and I mean, obviously stuck it throughout. Blair's tenure. I suppose I contented myself with the notion that we were able to achieve something at a local level. As I say, I was a councillor, then the chair of the housing committee, and then I was leader of the council. We were trying to deliver municipal socialism against a hostile government, even though it was supposed to be our own government in that sense. So I kind of understand that tribal loyalty, but I think we're in a very different place now. I know you were involved in establishing the Respect Party, and people have said, well, look, if ever there was a time to create a new political party, that was it, after the debacle of the Iraq War, the illegal Iraq War. I think this is different, though. I think because we've had now someone who was a socialist, someone who inspired millions of young people, old people, middle-aged people, men and women, black and white, inspired the country. And, we were on the way to become what we became a mass party. I think we could have gone even bigger. But even at the height of Jeremy's powers, we didn't control the Labour Party. Jeremy didn't control the Labour Party. The Labour Party was still controlled by the right wing of the party. The kind of Zionist lobby had a pernicious influence on the party. And it's not just my opinion. I think it's very, very clear. And you look at, Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, he's bankrolled by the likes of Trevor Chin and Jonathan Kestenbaugh. Trevor Chin is one of the leading figures in the British Zionist movement. So, and he himself has said that he supports Zionism without qualification. So, will Jeremy leave? I think. Not of his own volition. I mean, I wish he would. I hope he will, and I hope that the polls that you're organising today and other pressure will mount, and that Jeremy will help us, because I think there is no future in the Labour Party. If Jeremy gets to stay in the Labour Party, what are we going to achieve inside the Labour Party now? I mean, my point to people who were involved in the Don't Leave Organised campaign, for example, is what mechanism are you going to use to gain control of the Labour Party? If we couldn't gain control of the Labour Party when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, when we had a mass movement who were overwhelmingly supportive of Jeremy Corbyn and the programme that he was putting forward at that time, what hope have we got of gaining control of it now? Wouldn't it be better, therefore, to then use that energy to help us build a social movement and a new political vehicle? That's what I hope, and I think that I think Jeremy's on course to be expelled, if I'm honest. I mean, I can't see how Starmer will allow him back in, but let's wait and see. It's all speculation. There's so much happening. It's difficult to keep up at the moment with the way in which politics is moving. But for me, there's really no future for the Labour Party, and I wish Jeremy would see that and help us to build. And frankly, I think if he'd have done what you were arguing that he should do, George, I think more than a year ago, I think he was arguing and using your programme to make the point that Jeremy should appeal over the heads of the Parliamentary Labour Party and the hostile National Executive Committee to the mass membership. He should have done that. And I think if he'd have done that, people would have gone with him, people would have supported him. But unfortunately, it didn't happen, and we are where we are now.
Could have, would have, should have. It's written like stripes through a stick of Blackpool rock. Chris Williamson, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's go to the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, has said that there will be no return to austerity when he announces his spending review this week. But he did not rule out a public sector pay freeze. He said that any wage settlements needed to be considered in the context of the wider economic climate, hinting that the government could cap wages. However, Labour warned that this would be a kick in the teeth for frontline workers who provided support throughout the COVID pandemic. Unions have warned that if there is a freeze, they may take strike action. Sunak is also facing pressure from the group of One Nation Conservative MPs not to cut foreign aid spending to pay for the coronavirus crisis, as had been reportedly considered and not denied by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. US officials have granted emergency authorization for an experimental antibody treatment given to President Trump after his COVID-19 diagnosis. The drug developed by Regeneron will be allowed for use in people who have tested positive for the virus and are at risk of severe illness. Studies suggest that the therapy is effective when administered early after diagnosis, the company says. It comes as COVID-19 cases in the country continue to rise. The US has now more than 12 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 infections, with more than 255,000 deaths, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University. This is by far the highest death toll in the world. California has become a nighttime curfew in an attempt to curb a surge in coronavirus cases there. The state's latest figures are now worse than the previous peak in August, the Los Angeles Times reported. Across the US, daily death toll linked to COVID-19 has passed 2,000 for the first time since May. The Australian state of New South Wales is to reopen its border with neighbouring Victoria for the first time since July, after coronavirus cases there fell to zero. Victoria, which imposed a tough lockdown after a surge in cases, has reported no new infections since the beginning of November. The state is also relaxing its rules on wearing face masks. Australia has recorded around 900 deaths and 28,000 infections in total. The country has relied on lockdowns, widespread testing and aggressive contact tracing to push daily infections nationwide close to zero. A judge in Pennsylvania has dismissed a lawsuit from the Trump campaign that sought to invalidate millions of mail-in votes in the battleground state. Judge Matthew Brand said the suit, which rested on allegations of irregularities, was, quote, without merit. In the ruling, he wrote that the Trump campaign had sought to disenfranchise almost 7 million voters. This now paves the way for Pennsylvania to next week certify Joe Biden's win. Biden there leads by more than 80,000 votes. The Ethiopian government will not talk with leaders of the northern Tigray region to end the conflict there, an aide to the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said. We don't negotiate with criminals, we bring them to justice, not to the negotiation table, he reportedly said. African leaders have urged the government to meet Tigrayan leaders. The conflict has reportedly killed hundreds and displaced thousands in recent weeks. The UN has warned that it could trigger a humanitarian crisis. A man has been killed by a shark off a popular beach in Western Australia. The attack happened near Cable Beach in the north of the state. The man was pulled from the water but was later pronounced dead. There have been at least 22 shark maulings in 2020, according to an Australian government agency. In southern India, a team of 50 people have helped to rescue a male elephant from a deep well in the village of Dharmapuri. Locals dropped banana leaves down for the elephant to eat as the rescue dragged on through the night. The animal was eventually brought up to the surface upside down as cranes and belts lifted it to safety. And finally, be warned, don't let a moose lick your car. Officials in Jasper, an alpine town in Canada's Alberta province, have put up signs asking motorists to avoid allowing moose to lick the salt from their cars, a treat moose find hard to resist. A national park spokesman said they're obsessed with salt. It's one of the things they need for the minerals in their body. They usually get it from salt lakes in the park, but now they realise they can also get road salt that splashes onto cars. People often park on the side of the road in hopes of catching a glimpse of the moose, letting the animals approach. However, this can pose a serious danger. Allowing a moose to lick from a stationary car can get them habituated with being around vehicles, risking both the animals and the drivers who can accidentally crash into them. Moose and cars are not a good mix, the spokesman said. If you hit the moose with your car, you take the legs out from under it and it's going through your windshield, he said. And while other animals typically run away from humans when they approach, moose will stand their ground and charge if they feel threatened. Park visitors are not allowed to feed, entice or disturb wildlife in Canada's national parks, and violators can face fines of up to $25,000. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
The Moats medic, Dr. Ranjit Brar, has kept us up to date with developments throughout the coronavirus crisis, both at home and abroad, critiquing the British and American government approaches and pointing in the direction of alternatives. He himself will probably take the virus when it comes along, as will I. But there are many people out there, I'm all too aware, who believe that this has all been some kind of conspiracy. A conspiracy in whose interests it's never quite clear, but that the ultimate aim is to control us by making us wear a little mask across our face. If that doesn't make you cry, it might make you laugh. I've had a difficult day with these people on social media, and so I turn to the oracle, the expert, Dr. Ranjit Brar. Dr. Brar, thank you for joining us. Let's deal with the vaccines first, if we may. What can you do to update us from last week on when these vaccines might be here? And what order, if you like, people will be able to access them? And will they have to access them? They won't physically be forced to have one, but might they be discriminated against if they don't have one?
Thanks, George. I've been really enjoying your show this week. Fantastic guest, fantastic lineup, and happy to be back with you. On the question of the vaccine, we really have been dominated this week by huge numbers of sensational headlines saying how wonderful the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines are. But as I discussed with you last week, really all they have published are press releases rather than peer-reviewed publications. They're press releases concerning what they consider to be favourable outcomes of a first interim analysis. That's something that usually wouldn't get a lot of fanfare. They might get a little announcement in a trade magazine or a conference, but certainly wouldn't hit headlines and probably wouldn't be published widely. But it's something that obviously has been used to justify that something slightly strange is happening with the production of these vaccines. Yes, because of the health emergency, tens of millions and hundreds of millions and potentially even billions of doses of these two vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer are being produced prior to any publication of results. And it's being met very uncritically. I welcome the results as such as they are, but there are a few things which are strange about them. One, that it's really science by press release. Really, that there's such early, phase of their results. They're certainly no more advanced than any of the Chinese vaccines. In fact, less advanced than Chinese vaccines. Some of which, for example, Sinopharm has got 3 vaccines. They've given one of their vaccines, an inactivated vaccine, to very many of their students, diplomats, and industrial workers who are working abroad. Probably over 1 million doses they've given out, and they don't report any adverse effects at all. And they say not a single person who's taken the vaccine has so far got the virus. The other thing that I find slightly strange, other than that pure, why we're overemphasizing the results from the American and the European firms, which are really, less advanced. It's a newer technology, which is fine. But if we look at the trial, the Pfizer-BioNTech trial had 43,000 people enrolled in it. And they said there were 94 people within that trial who got the virus. Now, it struck me as odd when I looked at that. And similar numbers for Moderna. Moderna said they had 30,000 people enrolled. And they say there's 95 people, within their trial. 90 people got the virus having not been inoculated. And 5 got the virus having been inoculated with the vaccine. So not 100% efficacy on either one, as was shown from the older technology of giving an inactivated viral particle, which is what many of our vaccines are based upon, so the protein rather than the mRNA. But if you look at the rates of people who are getting the virus, the COVID, even amongst the non-vaccinated portion, the arms of those trials, they're incredibly low. So 0.3%, 0.6% of the people participating in the trial, allegedly in areas where have high rates of virus, are actually getting the virus. And that may be because of their primary. It's difficult to comment fully because the trial data isn't published. But if you look at the endpoints, Moderna says their endpoint is the symptomatic COVID is their primary endpoint. And only the secondary endpoint is severe COVID and also COVID infection. So I'm not totally clear from the press release, and there are press releases, they come with huge number of caveats that may or may not be effective. They're forward-looking statements. You can't hold us to the number of doses that we're going to produce. You can't hold us to the effectivity. But already, on that basis, we're rolling out plans to buy tens and hundreds of millions of doses and give them to the population. So it is slightly premature. But it does strike me, I can't figure out absolutely whether the people within the trial were symptomatic cases, and that's why they're so low. And then there would be other non-symptomatic cases, in which case we wouldn't be quite so sure about the percentage efficacy or not. So the data, I think, is, when you really read the small print, this is just of their press releases, because they've not been published as some of the other vaccines have more detail. in their publication. Certainly, the Sputnik vaccine had a much more detailed end of second phase publication. And certainly, if I think of the numbers who've been vaccinated, the Chinese vaccine seems to be the most efficacious, the safest, and have been used in the larger numbers. And they do seem to be now rolling out towards much larger scale delivery to the Chinese population, who have very low rates overall in their country because of the. And again, that's the other thing to emphasize, I suppose, that the primary thing the tool that we have already are the public health measures, and where China's been so successful, George.
Now, let's assume that we don't get the Chinese, although if you have any influence there, get me one, please. Let's assume we don't get the Russian one. We're stuck with these big pharma ones. Will people be forced to take them? Not necessarily proactively forced, but forced by omission. For example, if you've not had one, you won't be able to go to certain things or go into certain places. Might not be allowed into restaurants or go to work. I mean, what kind of implications would that kind of approach have in your view?
So certainly those ideas are being floated. If you look in the press, I haven't seen so many of those statements from the government that they will force people, but there's certainly those ideas being floated in the press, and it's a bit similar to Rishi Sunak seems to be floating every budgetary idea he has in the press and seeing whether he'll get away with it prior to announcing policy. So I don't know if this is a new tactic of the government. I think it would be disastrous if people were forced to take a vaccine. I know there are very many health professionals and people outside the health professional who want more information and more data and feel that the vaccines are coming very fast. Now, I personally probably feel that if they're relatively safe, and the data does seem to show they're relatively safe as far as we can judge it, I'd probably recommend to my elderly relatives to take it. Health workers I know are already being offered it. I was offered it this week. I was phoned by my manager and asked, would you like a vaccine? I said, which one? She said, I don't know. So we're being offered a vaccine in the very near future. And I think the frontline people will be those at high risk in nursing homes, those within the health profession, and possibly the elderly population. But at the moment, the apparatus is being put in place to deliver it without making it very clear which vaccine we are. I heard Matt Hancock on Radio 4 Today programme talking about the minus 70 degrees storage facility. So that strongly suggests to me that the one that they're likely to get first is the Pfizer-BioNTech, despite the fact that BioNTech and Moderna both have an mRNA vaccine. Pfizer's needs to be stored at minus 70. Moderna, which use a higher dose of mRNA, and that's, again, not clear to me what the differences exactly are between the two. I say they can store theirs at minus 20. So that strongly suggests it will be the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that we're offered. In terms of discrimination, that's not clear. So no one has said that at the moment it's being offered on a voluntary basis. But of course, the information to really make up your mind is not in the public domain. So it'd be difficult to force that on anyone who doesn't want to take it. However, if you said to a healthcare worker, look, you haven't had the vaccine, we don't know whether you've had the virus, you're at high risk, therefore, of being a vector for transmission to your patients, it seems like a very valid argument. If you don't have it, you're putting your patients at risk. It's always, a way pressure could be brought to bear. And I know some of my colleagues fear that may be the case, and they're uncomfortable about being asked to take a vaccine, which in their eyes, I think reasonably is as yet unproven.
Fascinating. Well, we'll talk again, I'm sure, many times about this, Dr. Brar. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Busy show this week, as you know. Should Corbyn quit Labour? Down 1, yes, 62. No, 31. So 2-1. And C, don't know yet, up 1, 7%. You can still vote for another 45 minutes on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let me take a 60-second break, and then it's That Was the Week, and what a week it was.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system. announcing the commencement of your weekly programming sanctioned by the mother of all talk shows. Support for the working class has been authorized for use during this program. All free speech is non-restricted. Moat's legends of ranking 10 have been granted straight-to-air status and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all free thinking, including socialism, will be legal for 3 continuous hours. Political incompetence, bigotry, and emergency medical personnel at Ward 5 will be unavailable until the program concludes. Blessed be our glorious teacher and mother of all talk shows. A University of the Airwaves reborn. Release George Galloway. May God be with you all.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
Now, if you're watching on Facebook, please share so the algorithm doesn't strangle us even before Biden has gotten into office. Please, Facebook users, Facebook watchers, right now, press share with all of your friends. Now, this is the spot where I spin back the years, don't I wish, to look at the 7 days in our past which shaped the present and no doubt the future. This is the week. This day, the 22nd of November, has been a particularly momentous one in history. On this day in 1963, President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas, allegedly by a lone gunman. Or was he alone? The tragic event sparked off the most long-lasting conspiracy theories in history. We'll be taking calls from 9:30 on that very subject. And on this day in 1955, RCA Records made its best ever investment, paying $35,000 to Sun Records for Elvis Presley's contract. His first record for them was Heartbreak Hotel. On the 22nd, at this time in 1990, Margaret Thatcher said she was standing down as British Prime Minister after her cabinet refused to back her in a second round of leadership elections. Anyone watching The Crown will have had a heart of stone not to laugh as these events unfounded. Rolled out. In 1995, Britain's most prolific female serial killer, Rosemary West, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 10 young women and girls. In 1997, Michael Hutchence, the Australian rock star and frontman of INXS, the country's most successful band, was found dead in an hotel room in Sydney, having hanged himself from the door. And still on this day, in 2005, Angela Merkel became the leader of the Christian Democrats, the CDU, and was sworn in as Germany's first woman chancellor. A day later, in 1963, following the death of JFK, 55-year-old Lyndon Baines Johnson began his new job as President of the United States. In 1979, Pink Floyd's The Wall was released, selling 6 million copies in 2 weeks. This was also the week in 1947 when the US House of Representatives Committee on Un-American Activities found the Hollywood 10, some of the most famous writers and directors, in contempt because of their refusal to reveal whether they were communists. A day later, the first systematic Hollywood blacklist was instituted, denying employment to American entertainment professionals due to alleged communist ties or sympathies. And a day after the Kennedy assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of murdering President Kennedy, was himself murdered in a Dallas police station, as you do, by someone called Jack Ruby, who was terminally ill and doomed to die in jail. This was the week in 1974 when police charged 6 men, innocent men, in connection with the Birmingham pub bombings 3 days before. They were released after 16 years in jail when their convictions were quashed by the Court of Appeal in May of 1991. The funeral of the assassinated President John F. Kennedy took place in Washington on November 25th, 1963. And on the same day in 1973, the Greek government was overthrown by the country's armed forces after weeks of conflicted unrest. The coup was orchestrated by the head of the fearsome military police, Brigadier Demetrios Ioannidis. His regime lasted only a few months, collapsing in 1974 after provoking an unsuccessful coup attempt in Cyprus, which led to the Turkish invasion of the island. He was charged with high treason and revolt and jailed for life. Exiled former Prime Minister Constantine Karamanlis was recalled to the country to head the new government. In this week, in 1942, one of the most famous movies of all time, Casablanca, premiered at Hollywood Theatre in New York. Play it again, Sam. In 1967, the French President Charles de Gaulle promised he would veto Britain's application to join the European Union, or the Common Market, as it then was, for the second time. We should have taken the hint. The Beatles released the Magical Mystery Tour as an album in the States and an EP in the United Kingdom. And in 1990, on November 28th, a tearful Margaret Thatcher formally tendered her resignation to the Queen and left Downing Street for the last time. There was dancing in the streets, okay. I was dancing in the street. And finally, in 1994, Norway voted to reject membership of the European Union in a referendum for the second time in its history. That was it. That was the 7 days that shook the world. Okay, let me read some of the mass of commentary that's coming in. In response to the poll, Mary says, Corbyn should leave only to start or join a new party. If not, then stay and fight. Ray says, sorry to say this, but I've lost respect for him. He couldn't even defend himself or his friends and left himself a sitting duck. And John says, I don't know. How Corbyn proceeds will tell whether he wishes to remain in solidarity with the oppressed or if he wants to wish away all his work just to say he's a Labour MP. The fact that there hasn't been any resignations from current MPs shows the rest aren't worth their words either. And on the US election, David says, Marx got it correct. The working class versus the money class. It has never changed. The middle class is content. This is why they do nothing. And Barry says, Donald Trump is the Rudy of the business world, and Rudy is the Donald Trump of attorneys. And Charlie says, it looks like Trump lost. But is it possible that there was some serious fraud? What does everyone think? And Joanne says, maybe Santa Claus hacked the election because Trump hadn't been a good boy. That's more believable than the communists in Venezuela. More in response to the poll, Tony says, yes, he should leave and form a proper party representing all working class people. Will take a long time and a lot of effort to gain their trust. However, I don't think many people trust any politicians anymore, so it may be the right time. Bang on, Tony. And Paula says, I really hope he quits and fights outside Labour. For him, for his principles and beliefs, and for us, who he inspired into politics. We know Labour is dead to the working class. And Sam says, not yet. He shouldn't. It's what they want. He should go down the legal route, and let's have it all out in court. He should have been suing people a long time ago. Chris Williamson used the courts well. More on Labour. Kit says, I'm not personally much of a Corbyn fan, but it is most refreshing to see you point out the major difference between anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinian beliefs. The compounding of these two very different subjects is one of the most dangerously myopic things that has happened within politics in my lifetime. And Covicini says that Keir guy and his clan should have quit Labour if they were truly so upset with this anti-Semitism. The fact that they didn't and hanged around to sabotage their own party tells us a lot. Exactly why Corbyn and his supporters should not hand the party over to them. Sorry, Covicini, they've already got it, and very firmly too, and they won't be shy about using their power. But it is a decent point. If Keith Starmer thought all this about Jeremy Corbyn, why was he asking people in Britain less than 1 year ago to elect him as Prime Minister? And Kelly says, so bizarre how the UK and the USA are experiencing the same things. Corbyn goes down there, Sanders goes down here. Both, quote-unquote, left parties are destroyed. And lastly, Tess says, well, if I were Corbyn, I'd be heading for the allotment and leaving them all to it. And Wendy says, I don't care. Labour are as relevant as the Lib Dems. Julie, though, says he should stay and fight, but I'm afraid he's not really a fighter. And Dan says he should be booted out, not quit. Anyone who gets destroyed by the numpty Boris should quit politics instantly. And Sean says he has destroyed Labour. And Ahmed says Starmer needs to be ousted or the party should split. Brian says, no, I'm a Tory and I don't like the man. But it's obvious from his comments that he has a long and deep attachment to the party. So he should surely stay and fight his corner for as long as he sees Labour as the best political home for him. And Hillary, 2Ls, might be her, who actually cares? Labour is dead to the working class, just a Tory party, Mark II. And Helen says, yes, he should quit. Many members are clinging to Labour through loyalty to him. He's giving them false hope at a time when they need to be fighting the establishment, which Labour is very much a part of. Let's take a call from the Bahamas. Who wouldn't? It's Mike in the Bahamas. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. How are you?
Good. I wish I was in the Bahamas.
It's a nice day today. It's about 27 degrees and sunny.
Stop it. Stop it. Go ahead.
Okay, what was I going to say? On voter fraud in the U.S. election, there's absolutely no evidence. 30 of Trump's 31 suits have been thrown out of court. There is evidence of them Republicans trying to fix the election with Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina talking to the Secretary of State of Georgia to throw out valid votes. There's also the certification in Michigan of Trump calling 2 Republican legislatures to Washington, D.C. in order to get them to rescind their approval.
What about the Russians?
Shenanigans seem to have been done by the Republicans.
Did the Russians do any shenanigans this time?
No, and I didn't do it the last time either. That I don't believe in, but it doesn't mean that just because the Russians weren't involved, that they weren't some shenanigans. But apparently, it wasn't the Democrats doing it. It's right now we can see it's the Republicans.
Do you think any
post-election shenanigans?
Just help us with this, Mike. Will any of this end up in the Supreme Court? And would Trump be more lucky there, in your view?
No, it doesn't appear that it'll get that far. They've got to have some suits, actually. I mean, they're going to have some merit before they'll get there. They're going to produce some evidence. They keep on saying that they have hundreds of pieces of evidence, but they never show it.
Mm. Yeah, that's true.
I would show it right away.
And yes, so would I. And yet the 2 lawyers, the main ones, Sidney, what's our second name? Sidney Powell, is it?
Sidney Powell.
Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani. I mean, they're big players in the legal world. Why are they allowing themselves to
they
go along
blame
with
the
this?
Clinton Foundation, George Soros, and Hugo Chavez, who's been dead for 7 years, for fixing the election, and that somehow Venezuela interfered with the Dominion software. I mean, that's just totally unbelievable. That's like UFOs and God knows what.
Oh, don't diss UFOs, Mike.
All right, it's like lizard people. How's that?
Anyway, you think it's over?
I think it's over, but I don't think Trump will ever admit it, and he is showing how he doesn't care for the American people by not helping the transition in the midst of a pandemic. It's inexcusable.
Yeah, and yet half the people in America think that he was cheated.
Well, I can't speak for them, but there's no evidence.
I know, but I'm just making the point because it's going to be hard to move on from all this in those circumstances.
Well, in this pandemic, we're going to have to, and they're going to have to do something fast. First of all, Lindsey Graham is going in front of an ethics committee for what he did in Georgia. And now what about Trump? Certainly that is a crime, what he did, calling those two Republican legislatures from Michigan to D.C. to put pressure on them.
And do you think that...
That's certainly a crime.
Do you think that the Trump administration will continue after January to be subject to legal suits and cases and so on? In other words, will Biden draw a line in January, or will the criminalization of the Trump family begin?
Well, Biden said he wanted to just not pursue Trump, but New
Mike's been cut off in the Bahamas. Here's the numbers. If you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. And you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both of us. Mike is back on the line. Mike, you just finished your point. What did Biden say about what happens after January?
Biden seemed to say that he is not going to go after Donald Trump. I don't know if I've got the whole story straight, but I know New York State, the district attorney, is going after him for other things. So he is definitely in a deep pile of trouble after his term is over.
Mike, thanks. Thanks very much for that call. Thanks for coming back on. Rusty is in West Wales. On the same subject, though. Go ahead, Rusty.
Is that guy deluded, George?
Which one? Mike in the Bahamas? No, he's just speaking his mind.
Living in the Bahamas, he's getting a nice day every day, the sun coming out, tax haven and all this.
You think the sun's gone to his head?
You for sure, dude, right? Also, I just want to say in front, hello to everyone and the team. I didn't get my souvenir, but I did send you my address, so I don't know what's happened there.
Well, there's a man through the glass looking at me now who will make sure that is dealt with. Go ahead, Rusty.
We'll sort this out now about this election, right? Those machines, the Dominion machines, right, were remote access machines, so they were plugged in up to a hard wire on the wall, okay? So basically you could install software, you could, when they were shut down and when they were booted up, other software could have been put up in there on the boot up, right? I'm not listening to this rubbish, right, that it was never possible to fix the election. Because you've got a company called Intelgi Inotech, right, in Spain, right, which have got a program called Kraken, right? And this is what Sydney was talking about last Friday. And basically, right, they're there to monitor internet traffic to see if there's any irregularities or if there's any hacking or any software going on. How is it possible? Is it possible that they detected something and they never said anything about it? Because when all the trouble was going on about the hacking of the telephones of the Chancellor in Germany and I can't forget what year it was, but when Putin and Obama was meeting in Edinburgh after the G20 in London, they were being hacked. And this all come out on TV. This all come out live. And you should have seen Putin's face, right, when he found out, right, all this stuff was being hacked. So I'm saying to you now, right, that when that happened, Google started moving all their servers, right, that they were using to spy to Spain, right? And everything, all the spy stuff, that any detection, any watching, any eyeballing, anything that's going on, right, with NSA, all gets tracked through Spain. Because the law there, I mean, it was still a dictatorship there as far as I'm concerned, okay? So I don't want to listen to anybody telling me.
Hold on, Rusty.
Right?
But you're obviously throwing out a lot of names and a lot of hypotheses, but where's the evidence? Rusty, where's the evidence?
I've sent you an email, right? And it actually puts these people in the frame. There was a video posted the other night that puts these people in the frame. And incidentally, Dominion services, right, voting services, moved out of the offices in Toronto only a few days ago. And there was a DC-8, right, flew from the Department of Justice last week to Toronto and flew back, right? That's been detected on flight radar. So there's people watching all this going on.
Rusty,
so I'm not going to listen to anybody tell me.
Hold on. This is all very impressive on the face of it, but why hasn't any of this been produced as evidence in any of the 30 court cases that have all been lost?
Well, they're not really lost as such, because basically they're actually putting forward their case, right? I mean, just because they lost them there doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a case. You shouldn't just ignore that. Just ignore that, right? I'm saying to you now, right, that it is possible that this has happened. And the people that are in the know are the media, the Democrats, right, and also these intelligence companies which actually do detect online fraud. So I'm saying to you now that this is being covered up. They're trying to sweep it under the carpet, and they're trying to get Biden in for another 10 years, whoever the hell is. I mean,
he'll not last.
We've talked about this before.
He'll not last 10 months, Rusty. Thanks for the call. Fascinating. Jamie is in Malaga, this time on Julian Assange. Go ahead, Jamie.
Hello, George. Nice to be on your show.
Nice
I'm definitely a big fan of yours.
Thank you, sir.
I'm basically a grassroots supporter for Julian Assange and his release. And whenever I'm in London, I campaign for him. I've got two questions this evening that relate to him. The first is how is it that the UK government are allowed to continue torturing Julian Assange? Why is he held in solitary confinement in a supermax prison riddled with the coronavirus? Why is he not released on bail? He has served his sentence for jumping bail, which he did for good reason due to the threat of extradition. And yet he's continuing to be tortured and held in solitary confinement now for 24 hours a day. Previously, for the last year and a half, since April 2019, he's been in solitary. He's got lung conditions. He's been effectively in solitary confinement for the last 10 years without seeing sunlight, and he needs to be released. And it's totally disgraceful what I'm seeing the UK government doing, the UK judicial system and the prisons. It's total torture.
Well, that was very powerful and moving, Jamie. As I expect you know, I agree with every word of it. So there's no need for me to repeat it. Just to accentuate the coronavirus point, Julian has an underlying condition. He has a lung condition already. Belmarsh Prison is swirling with the coronavirus, cutting down both prisoners and prison staff, including prison staff that Julian has been in contact with. And if Julian were to contract coronavirus, and if he were to, God forbid, perish from the coronavirus, then the British government and the British courts would have written their name in infamy, absolute infamy, in legal history and in political history also, for that matter. I wish I could give you an answer to your questions. I wish there was an answer to your question. But we both know that the answer is that the martyrdom of Julian Assange has been considered necessary by the security state in the United States and in Britain, its willing accomplice in this crime, and that the crushing of this butterfly on a wheel has already been predetermined. And if it's not to be finished with the extradition of Julian and his incarceration for the rest of his life in a supermax to end all supermaxes, it might even end in the perilous health condition that Julian Assange now faces. Let me take a moment's break to recover from that call from Jamie in Malaga.
Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Pizza Express Woking. What is it you want? Oh, you want an ill-advised interview on the BBC? A cheese pizza, extra immature, and a raw bailout. No, we don't take taxpayers' money. Yeah, but we do take contactless. Would you like a receipt for that, Mr. Prince?
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, the phone numbers in the UK, 02077 982 255. In the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet me at George Galloway, at RTUK News, preferably both of us. The poll's about to close. 1,568 voters. Should Jeremy Corbyn quit Labour? A, yes, 62%. B, no, 31%. C, don't know yet, 7%. So, by 2 to 1, the people think that Corbyn should quit Labour. Let's take the next call. Oswald is in Plymouth on the bullying allegations against the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. Go ahead, Priti.
Hi. Sorry, Priti here. It's Oswald. How you doing? George? You okay?
I'm good.
That's good. Yeah, I wanted to talk about these bullying regulations. Now, it's hypocrisy for the Labour Party to come out and start blaming the Conservative Party for bullying when they've got their own bullying problems in the way they've treated Jeremy Corbyn. However, that to one side, what is Boris Johnson doing backing someone like Priti Patel? She, of course, during the Theresa May administration, she was forced to resign because she was involved with the Israelis, went to the Golan Heights, had a huge conflict of interest, has some very, very right-wing views, extreme views, even for conservative standards, seems to hate Asians, seems to hate foreigners, despite the fact that she's a daughter of immigrants herself, you know, and with the laws that she's proposed, her parents would never have got in the UK, as I said. So my question to you is, what the hell is Boris Johnson doing supporting someone like this? What is in it for her? What is in it for him?
Well, all the other things you said, I agree with, but I'm afraid I have limited sympathy for highly paid senior civil servants complaining that their political master is bullying them. I remember vividly, you made the point about the contradiction in the Labour Party, which tried to break Jeremy Corbyn as a man. And that's a very fair point. But I remember very well, very vividly, unfortunately not everyone's got the same memory as me, when Gordon Brown was being accused of exactly the same things. Now look, if you are a minister elected by the people, the civil service have got to carry out your orders. And if they're not carrying out your orders and you get angry with them, that is not bullying, in my view. These are people on salaries, six-figure salaries, some of them 200,000, 300,000 pound salaries, who occupy the highest possible ranks in the civil service. And frankly, they have forsworn the right not to be sworn at by a minister who they are trying to obstruct. Now, you and I both hate Priti Patel, and so we probably hate what her orders were. But what if Jeremy Corbyn had been the Prime Minister? What if Big Diane Abbott had been the Home Secretary? Her civil servants would have been seeking to block her policies. Corbyn's civil servants would have been seeking to block his policies. And they would be crying bullying when the Labour ministers were trying to force them to carry out the government's policy. Anyone who's read the diaries of Richard Crossman, of Barbara Castle, of Michael Foot, of Tony Benn, would not, believe me, be automatically lining up behind highly paid senior civil servants in their conflicts with government ministers. Last word to you, Oswald.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I see your point, as I said. It's also interesting that Dominic Cummings this week walked out of, last week walked out of Parliament. Not walked out of Parliament, walked out of Boris Johnson's Downing Street. Now, I don't know whether you saw the interviews this week with Piers Morgan, your friend, on Good Morning Britain, but I think Dominic Cummings was probably doing them a favour by, doing the Cabinet a favour by keeping them off TV, because, by God, a journalist like yourself or Piers Morgan or Andrew Neil would have torn him a new rectum, in my opinion.
I didn't see those interviews, but I will make a point of now doing so. Oswald, thanks for a great call. Ian is in Colchester on the Julian Assange call we just took. Go ahead, Ian.
Oh, George, thanks for having me on the show.
Always welcome.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a quick chat about Julian Assange and the part that Amnesty International or Amnesty UK has or hasn't played. And this actually stems from a tweet I put out. It was back in the summer. I've been meaning to call you for a few months now, but it was back in the summer side, and my opinion has sort of changed as time has elapsed. And the tweet basically went along the lines of, politically speaking, there's been three milestones in my life. And I put, number one was when Tony Blair bombed Iraq, I realised the Labour Party wasn't the party I thought it was. Number two I put down was when the Parliamentary Labour Party attacked Jeremy Corbyn, I realised you'd never get socialism out of the Labour Party. And then number three, and this is the one that I got the reaction to, was I actually said in Amnesty International or Amnesty UK not raising a finger to defend Julian Assange shows that they are a Western government mouthpiece. And very almost instantly, Amnesty UK got back, they replied back, and they put a link to a online petition they had, and there was a document attached to it which was very weak. There was no real detail to it. There's no substance to it, and it just basically said don't extradite Assange. And it very much, that's saying I think one protests too much. It very much seemed to be along those lines. It's almost it was on the shelf ready to go. If anyone complains that they haven't done enough, this is what we send out. It was there within an hour. We were doing the tweet, and I just put a quick tweet back saying too little, too late, and that was the end of it. But then more recently, like the trial that we've just had, because that was like the pre-trial trial, if you like. So the more recent trial, which thankfully the likes of Craig Murray have been reporting on, otherwise we wouldn't have a clue what's going on. But what surprised me was that Amnesty International actually asked to attend that trial, and they was denied access. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, maybe they are a bit more than just a Western government mouthpiece. I think my view is actually even a little bit of exposure, because obviously Amnesty International would have a wider exposure than someone like Craig Murray. Even that would be more exposure than the authorities would want. I just wonder what your take was that.
It's much the same as yours. I'm not a fan of Amnesty International. historically, but it's obviously better to have them supporting a case that one is deeply concerned about than not. And the fact that they were locked out by the court authorities from the trial in the Old Bailey speaks volumes. It's obvious that the power that is trying to break Julian Assange was not prepared to take the risk of amnesty coming down on the wrong side from their point of view. But it's not, of course, restricted to amnesty. The National Union of Journalists, the journalists on the newspapers, the journalists on the television, all of whom could very well, if they were behaving as journalists, and that might be asking a little too much of many of them, would themselves be at risk of precisely the same kind of persecution that Julian Assange has been facing. All of them have been too little, too late, and many of them have done absolutely nothing at all. Thanks, Ian. Another Ian, this time in Hounslow. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. I was just listening to Oswald about Preeti Patel.
Yeah.
And I really did want to phone in. Now, I'm not a right-winger at all by any stretch of the imagination, but Preeti Patel walked into a trap. She was basically obstructed and frustrated by an entitled elite who basically set her up to fail. And this elite has a superiority complex that no one knows anything better than them.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
definitely true. That's definitely true. Well, nobody elected them, Ian, and nobody can unelect them.
Well, the thing is, George, the Home Secretary is going to be like the England football manager. No one will want the job. And once they get the job, they cannot do anything. It'll be a lose-lose situation. We cannot keep losing Home Secretaries who don't have a chance to learn from their mistakes. Otherwise, we're just going to be doomed to failure. Whatever your political persuasion is, you have to learn from experience and be allowed to make a few mistakes, not loads, but a few, to get the job done. And it's not happening. It's not happening.
Well, I think the Home Office is not fit for purpose, as someone famously said when they were Home Secretary. It is far too vast a department, far too vast a remit, with many sometimes conflicting interests within it. But the one thing I know as a scholar of politics from the Second World War until now, there's not much I haven't read, Ian. The one thing I know for sure is that the entrenched Mandarin class of the upper reaches, highly paid civil servants, are not people that anyone progressive, anyone left-wing should be crying any tears about. Because the purpose, as every Labour minister's diaries have shown, beyond contradiction, the purpose of these civil servants at that level is to frustrate those policies which the establishment doesn't like. And it's just not credible. If you're a £300,000 a year permanent secretary and you are falling out with a here today, gone tomorrow minister, that you can cry bullying like you were a young woman in the typing pool who could legitimately cry bullying from her managers. That's bullying. Ordering a highly paid senior civil servant to do what they're told is not bullying, at least not in my book. Thanks very much, Ian, for that call. 02077 982 255 is the number. If you're in the US, 001757 744 4480. In the next hour, just a minute or two after the news, I'll be interviewing the Right Honourable Norman Baker, former minister in the Home Office, a man who may or may not take the same view as me on the Priti Patel affair. He was a long-standing Liberal Democrat MP. He's the author of The Strange Death of David Kelly, and he's the executive producer of the film that I am making called Killing Kelly. On all of these things, you're going to want to hear him. He's a great talker. Norman Baker, former MP, still a Privy Councillor. Let's get the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, has said that there will be no return to austerity when he announces his spending review this week. But he did not rule out a public sector pay freeze. He said that any wage settlements needed to be considered in the context of the wider economic climate, hinting that the government could cap wages. However, Labour warned that this would be a kick in the teeth for frontline workers who provided support throughout the COVID pandemic. Unions have warned that if there is a freeze, they may take strike action. Sunak is also facing pressure from the group of One Nation Conservative MPs not to cut foreign aid spending to pay for the coronavirus crisis, as had been reportedly considered and not denied by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. US officials have granted emergency authorization for an experimental antibody treatment given to President Trump after his COVID-19 diagnosis. The drug developed by Regeneron will be allowed for use in people who have tested positive for the virus and are at risk of severe illness. Studies suggest that the therapy is effective when administered early after diagnosis, the company says. It comes as COVID-19 cases in the country continue to rise. The US has now more than 12 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 infections, with more than 255,000 deaths, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University. This is by far the highest death toll in the world. California has become a nighttime curfew in an attempt to curb a surge in coronavirus cases there. The state's latest figures are now worse than the previous peak in August, the Los Angeles Times reported. Across the US, daily death toll linked to COVID-19 has passed 2,000 for the first time since May. The Australian state of New South Wales is to reopen its border with neighbouring Victoria for the first time since July, after coronavirus cases there fell to zero. Victoria, which imposed a tough lockdown after a surge in cases, has reported no new infections since the beginning of November. The state is also relaxing its rules on wearing face masks. Australia has recorded around 900 deaths and 28,000 infections in total. The country has relied on lockdowns, widespread testing and aggressive contact tracing to push daily infections nationwide close to zero. A judge in Pennsylvania has dismissed a lawsuit from the Trump campaign that sought to invalidate millions of mail-in votes in the battleground state. Judge Matthew Brand said the suit, which rested on allegations of irregularities, was, quote, without merit. In the ruling, he wrote that the Trump campaign had sought to disenfranchise almost 7 million voters. This now paves the way for Pennsylvania to next week certify Joe Biden's win. Biden there leads by more than 80,000 votes. The Ethiopian government will not talk with leaders of the northern Tigray region to end the conflict there, an aide to the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said. We don't negotiate with criminals, we bring them to justice, not to the negotiation table, he reportedly said. African leaders have urged the government to meet Tigrayan leaders. The conflict has reportedly killed hundreds and displaced thousands in recent weeks. The UN has warned that it could trigger a humanitarian crisis. A man has been killed by a shark off a popular beach in Western Australia. The attack happened near Cable Beach in the north of the state. The man was pulled from the water but was later pronounced dead. There have been at least 22 shark maulings in 2020, according to an Australian government agency. In southern India, a team of 50 people have helped to rescue a male elephant from a deep well in the village of Dharmapuri. Locals dropped banana leaves down for the elephant to eat as the rescue dragged on through the night. The animal was eventually brought up to the surface upside down as cranes and belts lifted it to safety. And finally, be warned, don't let a moose lick your car. Officials in Jasper, an alpine town in Canada's Alberta province, have put up signs asking motorists to avoid allowing moose to lick the salt from their cars, a treat moose find hard to resist. A national park spokesman said they're obsessed with salt. It's one of the things they need for the minerals in their body. They usually get it from salt lakes in the park, but now they realise they can also get rolled salt that splashes onto cars. People often park on the side of the road in hopes of catching a glimpse of the moose, letting the animals approach. However, this can pose a serious danger. Allowing a moose to lick from a stationary car can get them habituated with being around vehicles, risking both the animals and the drivers who can accidentally crash into them. Moose and cars are not a good mix, the spokesman said. If you hit the moose with your car, you take the legs out from under it and it's going through your windshield, he said. And while other animals typically run away from humans when they approach, moose will stand their ground and charge if they feel threatened. Park visitors are not allowed to feed, entice or disturb wildlife in Canada's national parks, and violators can face fines of up to $25,000. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Okay, here's the second poll. Will Britain reach a deal with the European Union? A, yes. B, no. C, hope not. So currently it's yes 43%, no 37%, hope not 20%. 412 people have voted and it's only been 5 minutes. So have your say on that. This probably is the week in which a deal, if there is to be a deal, will be reached between Britain and the European Union. Let me speak to a man who campaigned as earnestly for Remain as I did myself for Brexit. A political opponent, but an old friend, Norman Baker. Welcome to the show. I'm glad that you were able to get away from your regular radio show yourself on a Sunday night. Maybe you can tell us, first of all, about that show and how we can listen to it.
Well, George, it's nice to speak to you again. I wouldn't recommend, of course, people listen to it live because they won't be listening to you if they do that.
That's right. They can pre-record.
they can listen to it again for up to an hour, for up to a month afterwards, by going to the Sea Haven FM website, and then there's a listen again facility there, and I play 70s hits between 7 and 8. I play the blues between 8 and 9, which is more my genre, really. And then on Monday evenings between 8 and 9, I do what's called the Hidden 60s. I play obscure tracks from the 1960s. So that's kind of my music.
Well, it's exactly the kind of music that I listen to, all three genres. So I'll be myself looking for Sea Haven FM. As you were a former minister in the Home Office, let me ask your view on the Priti Patel affair.
Oh, George, it's really shocking, isn't it? I mean, honestly, Priti Patel has got a reputation, I think, as being rather aggressive and had that before this particular fracas blew up. She also, of course, had to leave the government 2 years ago because Theresa May took a rather more appropriate line than Boris Johnson has done in terms of ministers misbehaving. You may remember on that occasion, she went abroad to Israel without telling anybody and started negotiating with the Israeli government and had to be dismissed effectively as a consequence of that, and quite rightly so. The problem is here that there's been a report by Alex Allen, who's a very, very senior civil servant. He used to chair the Joint Intelligence Committee. He's been around the block a number of times. Everybody regards him as fair and balanced. And he recommended very clearly that she had broken the ministerial code. Now, when that happens, I'm afraid you have to go. But Boris Johnson's decided she's going to stay. So I'm afraid we're now seeing a situation where, under this government, ministers never resign, special advisors never resign, and civil servants are either forced out or thrown under the bus. It's not a very happy situation.
I'm not, having read every diary of every senior Labour minister on leaving office, Crossman, Castle, Foote, Ben, I'm not myself automatically sympathetic to senior civil servants. I seem to recall all of the aforementioned having endless fights with their civil servants to implement their government's programme.
Well, it's perfectly true that civil servants sometimes resist ministerial wishes. Sometimes they do so for what they believe to be appropriate reasons, which is to say, this won't work, Minister. Other occasions, or a few minority of occasions, I think, then they actively resist. And that, of course, that's quite wrong. And Alex Allen, in his report, drew attention to the fact that the civil service hadn't covered itself in glory in this particular instance. So there are lessons to be learned there as well. But ultimately, there is an independent assessor, Alex Allen. The Prime Minister receives the report and he ignored the recommendations. And I think the lesson out of this, for me, is that the Prime Minister should not be the arbiter of the ministerial code. He is a minister himself. He has political reasons not to let ministers go. That cannot be right. But of course, it's not simply Priti Patel. We saw Dominic Cummings going for an eye test, apparently, at Barnard Castle. The most ludicrous explanation ever. He didn't resign. We've seen Gavin Williamson make a complete mess of the exams over the summer. And who resigned? The civil servant in charge of the department resigned. Gavin Williamson, who's regarded by most people as the weakest member of the government, didn't resign. So the Prime Minister has got form, I'm afraid, on this matter.
What is it like, Norman? Many people will have seen the thick of it. Many people, older people, will have seen Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. How authentic are these representations of the tensions between political ministers and supposedly non-political civil servants?
Well, I always tell people that Yes Minister is more documentary rather than comedy, although it was an excellent comedy as well. I think it can be overplayed. Of course, comedy naturally exaggerates the kernel of a truth. That's what comedy does. I have to say, in my experience, I found my civil servants very helpful, very willing to do what I wanted to, ask them to do. I was pushing the boat, as you would hope I would do, I think, George, and they responded very, very well. In the Department for Transport, in the Home Office, they were rather less willing to be helpful. But I think that's a departmental mentality rather than anything to do with me. But they couldn't be more helpful in the Department for Transport. And I have to say that I came out of government with a better opinion of the civil service than I went in, and I came out with a worse opinion of the press.
Very good. Last question on this point then. The civil service in the Home Office and the vast remit of the Home Office and the track record of one after another failed Home Secretaries. It's a bit of a graveyard. Isn't it true what John Reid said when he was the Home Secretary, that the department was not fit for purpose?
Well, I think in some ways it isn't fit for purpose, and Home Secretaries have a very difficult task. Theresa May lasted, I think, 6 years as Home Secretary, which is something of a record. But she did so by squeezing out any independent thought, by running the ship through her special advisors in a very unpleasant way, as a matter of fact, and allowing no alternative view to be put forward. Now, you can run a department that way. It doesn't actually provide a very satisfactory and helpful outcome at some points, and it doesn't also generate very much morale in terms of those who are working there. But you can do it. It's not something I recommend, and I don't think necessarily you need to fail as a Home Secretary. It's a more challenging task, but I think with goodwill you can pass. Having said that, the department itself covers a huge expanse of topics, everything from animal experiments through to highly secure matters and to do with the security of the state. So, everything and all points in between. So things are probably bound to go wrong there. But nevertheless, the atmosphere there was pretty toxic. I set this out in my book, of course, Against the Grain, my
I'm just about
memoir.
to say that. I mean, it's a fantastic book. And so let's talk about it. One of the things that you were landed with was relations with the royal family, that if we hadn't read your book, we would have thought that The Crown on Netflix was exaggerating.
Well, yes, I think, George, you're talking about my latest book, which is called And What Do You Do? Whereas I was referring to the one before, which is Against the Grain, the memoir. But both of them, in a sense, touch on the royal family. But the Against the Grain one, actually, the way I described it was I went from the sunny beaches of the Department for Transport across the road to outer Siberia in the Home Office, I think was how I described it. My favourite quote about myself, if I may indulge myself for a second, was it came from an independent journalist, an independent newspaper, who said that while I was at the Home Office, I was like the only hippie at an Iron Maiden concert.
Brilliant. But have you seen The Crown on Netflix?
No, I haven't. But I mean, I haven't seen it. But I've read reports of it and so on. But I'm not a great fan of these programs that are neither documentaries nor fiction. I mean, they try to straddle the line. Faction, I think it's called. And I don't think it necessarily works very much. You can't tell what's true and what's not in these programs.
I don't know. If you'd watched what I watched last night, it would have cheered you up seeing Mrs. Thatcher being booted out.
Well, that would always cheer me up. I could watch that on a loop, I think.
I am watching it, actually, on a loop. And Gillian Anderson crying in the back of the limousine will be forever etched in my mind. It's the week, isn't it, Norman, where the deal that people said would never be done will in fact be done?
Well, I think there will be a deal of sorts. It will be a very good deal, and it will leave all sorts of loose ends, I suspect. I don't know what it will cover, but on January the 1st, people may find themselves queuing at the airport into the non-EU channel and waiting hours to get into the country. They may find that the telephone roaming charges, which were abolished by the EU, have suddenly come back in. Little things will I think, annoy people. But it's also a question of what kind of deal it is, irrespective of whether you want to stay or whether you want to leave. I mean, I think we must retain our high environmental standards, which partly come from the EU. We must maintain our animal welfare and food quality regulations, and the government appears to be resisting both of those, which is rather worrying. And what we don't want is to have a poor deal with the EU, to scrabble around to try and find a deal with somebody else, and end up with a whole lot of chlorinated chicken and everything else, hormone-infested beef from the US.
Well, if you were as old as me, you'd know that Britain had high environmental standards before the EU even existed. That the Clean Air Act in Britain cleaned our air in the 1950s, long before any such newfangled policies came into play on the European mainland.
Yes, that's true, George, and it doesn't automatically follow that if we leave the EU, standards will drop. But the government, if you read between the lines as to what's happening in these negotiations, appears to be unwilling to sign up to the existing EU environmental regulations. Now, I find that rather worrying. Why wouldn't they sign up to them?
You see, the point, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that Remainers, like the Liberals, Labour, some in the Conservative Party, quite a lot in the Conservative Party before last December, said that Boris Johnson would never get the Brexit through. And then they said, well, there's not going to be a deal. Project Fear has raged all year about a no-deal Brexit. And now you're agreeing with me that there is going to be a deal.
Well, I think there may well be a deal because it's in the interest of both sides to reach a deal. But as to what kind of deal it is, remains to be seen. If we end up with 40% surcharges on Welsh lamb going out of the country, that won't be a very good deal. If we end up with massive tailbacks at Dover and Newhaven in my old constituency, that won't be a very good deal. You know, if you end up with just 30 seconds added to the processing time for a lorry, you end up with a 25-mile tailback out of Dover. So these things don't come without a price, George. I mean, they really don't, whether you're in favour of it or not. But we'll wait and see what comes out of it. If we end up being an extremely strong nation and it turns out to be in the language of Brexiteers a sort of liberation, and we do all these deals with everybody else and prosper marvellously, then I'll eat my words. But I'm afraid I don't see that coming down the track at the moment. And also, if you're going to have a massive change in our arrangements with our major trading partner at the same time as you've got COVID-19 roaming the streets, that's not a very happy coincidence.
The Right Honourable Norman Baker, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I'll be tuning in tomorrow to your radio show.
It's the Yardbirds tomorrow, George. We like the Yardbirds.
Oh, I do. I very much like the Yardbirds. Very, very much. I'll be there. You can count on one listener for sure. And I'm sure you've got many more. Norman Baker, thank you very much indeed there. The poll is still raging. Will Britain reach a deal with the EU? Yes, 43%. No, 37%. Hope not, 20%. And you can vote right up to the end of the show on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let me take a 60-second break.
Barnier said in his latest statement, despite the difficulties we face, an agreement is within reach, if both sides are willing to work constructively, if they are willing to cooperate.
Sacre bleu! 60 billion in les toilettes is the Maginot Line all over again. What shall we do?
We have got to get the Englanders of Treasure Island back on track and get them overpaying for our cars again.
My union friends, what shall we do? We are running out of options.
There is only one thing we can do, mon ami. What we do best.
Warning, warning. European Union reversing. Warning, warning.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, on COVID, Jeff says, capped wages, tell that to the nurses. Clap on Thursdays, stab them in the back, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday. And Ollie says, why do they never encourage natural organic foods and herbs, therefore boosting the immune system? Far more effective than some silly mask. And Kit says, although I wouldn't tell anyone else what to do, a compulsory vaccine doesn't wash well with my beliefs in individual sovereignty. It will be my choice whether I get vaccinated or not the government's. And in response to the poll, Ben says, Britain could have made a deal, however, the EU's intransigence means, unfortunately, we never will. And Roy says, Britain has to rejoin the EU on revised conditions. It's good for the UK, the EU, Africa, and the global economy. As a global economy, Britain should not be selfish on a decision that has global economic implications. And Rhiannon says, Johnson can't afford to make a deal, or his hedge fund chums will crucify him. They stand to make a fortune when we crash out with no deal. He has to stay in post until they've achieved their objective. I'll cut that one out and keep it, shall I, Rhiannon? And Enigma says, EU is not interested in an exit deal with the UK. If it did, other EU nations that want to leave the EU might be tempted to leave the Union. Let's go to calls for the rest of the show. Ben is in Hull on COVID. Go ahead, Ben.
Hi, you all right, George?
I'm good, sir.
So recently I've seen a lot of stuff on social media regarding the Coronavirus Act and how it doesn't come under common law and how people are, they're standing up against it. I just want to know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I'm in favour of taking all sensible precautions against catching the coronavirus or passing it on to anyone else. So I obey the law on the coronavirus. What about you?
Well, I've been reading up a lot about it, and somebody pointed me in the direction of something posted on the Gov website, which I found, rather alarming. And in March, the Public Health of England declared that COVID-19 was no longer a HCID, which is obviously a health illness, an infectious illness, infectious disease. So since March, it has no longer been declared an infectious illness or infectious disease. In the UK,
quite a lot of people have been infected by it since March.
But why is it not being noticed by the public health? Why is it not no longer infectious? How can it not be infectious if people are catching it?
Ben, this is sophistry, my dear. People are leading you by the nose on this kind of thing.
This is literally off the Gov website.
But it was reclassified as something else. It's the greatest public health challenge that we've faced in this country for as long as I've been alive. It has caused the deaths of 80,000 more people this year than in the last 5 years. It has filled our hospitals. It has killed 400 doctors, nurses, and care home professionals. Friends of mine have died of it. Friends of mine have suffered with it. So what exactly are you on here telling me? That it's not infectious?
I'm not sure. I'm just going on what's on the Gov website, and that's exactly why
you say you're not sure. You say you're not sure. Tell us what you think. Don't be coy, Roy. Tell us what you think.
Well, I'm going to quote Mikey Eden here. So he's a doctor. You probably are aware of who he is. And he said that the pandemic was over a long time ago in a video, an unlocked video, and it's going around right now. You can watch it for yourself.
You guys are always doing your research on the internet. Look,
okay.
200.
I mean, is that not where research comes from?
200.
Is that not where research comes from?
255,000 people in the United States. Yeah, see, you have got a point of view. You are being coy, Roy. You come on here playing the daft laddie. I just saw something on the government's website. Whether they died of COVID or whether they died with COVID is something I can choose between Ben in Hull on YouTube, or I can trust the doctors and the medical authorities in the United States, in Britain, in Russia, in China, in Cuba, in Vietnam, in South Korea. I can trust them, or I can go with wee Ben.
I mean, I'm not
on YouTube.
I am not a professional. I'm going from statistics that are posted on ONS, on the Gov website.
Well, what are you saying?
These are statistics.
Tell us then. You started out by saying that COVID was not an infectious disease. Are you really saying that? Are you really saying that, Ben? Ben, stop being silly. Are you really saying that the coronavirus 19 is not infectious? Ben, are you really saying that coronavirus 19 is not infectious?
I'm repeating what has been stated on the government website.
But I already explained to you that it was otherwise thus classified. It is a public health emergency. Aren't you aware of it? Don't you know the cost we've paid of it? Don't you know how many people have died? How many people are sick? How many doctors and nurses are dead now in the cold earth, fighting something that you're on the radio telling me doesn't exist? Be gone with you. Be gone with you. I have no longer any patience for this kind of juvenile student nonsense. Jerry is in St. Andrews. Jerry, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. My blood's up. My blood's up. I hope I'm not going to fight with you as well.
I don't know how to follow up from the last caller. My question I was going to ask you, how do you feel about this hate speech act that they're trying to enforce in Scotland.
It's utter madness. And I made a broadcast on it on RT. You can see it on YouTube, Jerry. It is calculated to, and certainly overwhelmingly likely to, create more hate than any good that it could possibly do. And I pray in aid the Scottish police, the Scottish advocates, the Catholic Church in Scotland, writers, journalists, poets, playwrights, filmmakers, all of whom have said this is a piece of madness, and that the SNP government are continuing on and on and on with it in the face of all this opposition tells me that the SNP have completely lost the plot.
Correct. Yeah, unless they're planning on, funding and giving everybody else new keyboards with letters that aren't on them, it's not going to help anything.
Not at all. And according to the minister, Hamza Youssef, conversations in private homes will be prosecutable. So if, God forbid, you and your wife and your children had a conversation about me, that you didn't like me because I was a Fenian, because I was a Catholic, I could ask the police to arrest you for that. What kind of madness is this, Jerry?
It's ridiculous. Yeah, I'm scared just to even... Well, I'm on the phone with you just now, but I'm scared to just, be able to say anything.
Well, exactly. And that's what's intended to... That's what's intended to be achieved. There's very little hate crime in Scotland. Scotland is 98% white. There is mercifully little racism of the most potentially violent and hateful kind in Scotland. So what is this hate crime bill going to target? I'll tell you. Two things. One of them, what I've just alluded to, the religious divide in Scotland. The second is the SNP's mania with so-called transgender rights. They have drummed out of the country J.K. Rowling, their most successful compatriot. She's not welcome in Scotland anymore because she doesn't accept that men can become women merely by declaring so. That is hate speech under Hamza Youssef's hate crime bill. Misgendering someone, using the wrong pronouns to someone. You'll have them on the phone to the police. What kind of madness is this?
Yeah, exactly. I keep getting told I'm not allowed to see colour, even though I can see two different ones right in front of me the whole time.
Okay.
I don't know how it's going to work out.
No, well, they'd be well advised to drop it, and any incoming administration in May in Holyrood really must drop this before it goes any further. Jerry, thanks for the call. Brooke is in Washington on the JFK anniversary. Brooke, most welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. I'm always melancholy on this date because JFK was somebody very important to me.
Yes.
We had his picture on our wall. He was the first Irish Catholic, the only, to be president of the United States. Therefore, in my house, he was a revered figure. And I loved how he looked and how he sounded, and I learned off by heart his inaugural address. And then on this day, my father came out and told me, I was playing in the street, and told me that the president had been killed. And I wept at the age of 9. And every year when I think about it, I feel like weeping again. Over to you, Brooke.
Oh, thanks. Yes. Yeah, definitely. He moved
everybody in a way that I don't think anyone had until that point. So I totally agree with you. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't born yet for another 13 years almost. So definitely before my time. The reason I was calling related to Kennedy was to discuss just a theory that I've had for, a little bit over 20 years, partly influenced by, the movies by Oliver Stone, the JFK movie, and later on the Nixon movie in the 90s. My view is that the people who participated in the Bay of Pigs fiasco had a lot to gain. Oh, maybe not necessarily gain, but like they had plenty of reason.
Revenge, yeah.
Revenge. Maybe.
Motive.
So looking at 7 quick points, I'll try to make this as quick as I can. I know there's other callers. But Cuba's capitalist government was overthrown in 1958-59. The elite left the country primarily for the U.S. Point 2 is that the communist revolution in Cuba was still fresh in 1960, when Cuban exiles cooperated with the CIA to plan a covert invasion to retake their homeland in what would be known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The U.S. government would provide arms, transportation, intel, and aerial support to the invading Cuban expatriate army as it retakes rule from Fidel Castro's new, quote, usurper regime. Point 3 is that the personal differences between President Kennedy and CIA Chief Allen Dulles results in the mishandling of intel between the intelligence community and the ground troops participating in the invasion. This, in effect, results in no aerial support by the U.S. to the Cuban invading army. When it reached the coast of Cuba, the invading troops were outnumbered, outgunned, and therefore easily overtaken by Castro's forces. And those that are, quote, fortunate enough to actually survive are humiliated. Point 4 is that Fidel Castro's regime, fearing another possible invasion, requests Soviet aid to repel future U.S. attempts at the assassination of Fidel Castro, as well as other direct military affronts. The Soviet leadership introduces the idea of a nuclear defense facility on Cuban soil, which would likely prevent such additional affronts, resulting in the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62. This crisis unfolds in 13 days of the most intense standoff between Kennedy and Khrushchev, including the possibility of nuclear war, until the Soviets abandoned the nuclearized Cuba plan, as well as any nuclear armament nations in the Western Hemisphere by the Soviet Union. However, the desired effect of no more U.S. or Cuban-American invasion attempts against communist Cuba is also achieved on hindsight. Point 5 is that with the removal of the possibility of any meaningful attempt at regaining their homeland under Kennedy's watch, Cubans within the U.S. become angered at the president, some possibly having been survivors of the Bay of Pigs fiasco, people that would view themselves as having been betrayed, that Kennedy is a traitor to them. It is even conceivable that some might bear so much bloody anger at losing their homeland, anger at losing their wealth, anger at Kennedy for backing off of Cuba, which is only 90 miles from the U.S., that the anger could be irrational enough to involve an actual attack against them. Keep in mind that the survivors of the Bay of Pigs invasion attempt are military experts in their own right, having been trained by the U.S. Armed Services, as well as the intelligence community. The very training that they had received from the U.S. government could come in handy if they were to target another hot target. Furthermore, they would likely maintain contacts with the intelligence community, which viewed them as intelligence gatherers and committed allies. Even possible is the idea that if another affront against Castro were to arise someday in the future, that his replacement would come from a known cooperative within the Cuban community. Obviously, in November 22nd, '63, Kennedy is assassinated. 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald is accused and arrested. Oswald, with an admittedly very shady past for that time, still refers to himself as a patsy, implying that he was framed, which is not that typical for a psychotic killer, from what I know, in my own opinion. Now, keep in mind, point 7, if this is all true, then the Warren Commission and its investigators would have, at some point during their investigation of the Cuban angle, concluded that A, the U.S. plotted an invasion of Cuba, an ex-ally, B, the invasion failed directly because the U.S. government failed in providing adequate support, C, this resulted in the USSR trying to form a nuclear defensive shield around Cuba, D, Kennedy's administration, in an effort to ameliorate the situation, backed off from Cuba and even gave away a base in Turkey to the Soviets,
the very government aiding Castro.
Well, I need to stop you, both because of the hour and because that is a factual error. They didn't give away a base in Turkey to the Soviet Union. They took their own nuclear weapons out of that base in Turkey and no longer threatening the Soviet Union. I agree with all of those points that you've made, Brooke. I think they are part of the mix. But they're not the whole story. I did a big show on the Kennedy assassination just a month or so ago. It's available on my Patreon page. You can go to it, to George Galloway Patreon page, and you can listen to expert testimony from people who think, like you and like me, that the Warren Commission was a gigantic cover-up, that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill Kennedy, and that Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy involving, among others, the very forces that you have just adumbrated there. Let me go to Sean in Lanarkshire in Scotland, partly because I can't visit him. I'm not allowed to drive into Lanarkshire, Sean. In fact, when I cross the border on Thursday, I'm not even sure I'll get into Scotland. Go ahead.
How are you doing, George?
I'm good.
Thanks for getting us on again. You're more than welcome up here in my book. Don't worry about it, brother.
Thank you, sir.
John, I wanted to use this weekend, which is the centenary of the Bloody Sunday massacre in Croke Park.
Yes, the original Bloody Sunday, yeah.
Indeed, yes, the 21st of November 1920.
Yeah.
And for your listeners, that's the incident where the British Army and the Black and Tans went into a Gaelic football match and indiscriminately opened fire on the crowd. They killed 14 civilians and more than 60 were wounded, men, women and children. Churchill declared them as gallant and brave, but I'd like to remember all those who have died in massacres since, and use this weekend to remember those of Miley, Jallianwala, North King Street, Ballymurphy, Bloody Sunday in 72, and probably more pertinent to what we've got today, it would seem that the Australian SAS are training to conduct massacres by bloodying their troops. So I'd just like to remember all those innocent men, women and children murdered by empire and forces for doing nothing more than living their lives in the wrong place.
Amen, Sean. Beautiful call and very well made points indeed. Let's go to Robert in London. Robert, welcome.
Gigi. Yeah, thank you, Gigi. It's the first time speaking to you. I'm so happy.
Welcome. You're most welcome, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. There's a situation here that I would like to explain to you, which is very important for all the people in Britain. Yeah, these days, the scientists, they don't have a clue what is happening. And the coronavirus is very real. The people, they don't understand what is happening in the world at the moment. These days, scientists doesn't have nothing to do with, they don't know what is going on. The doctors don't know what is going on. The coronavirus is a real disease. It's an illness coming from the sun. It's not from the China. It's not from India. It's not from America. It's not from nowhere. It is from the sun. It's an airborne disease. And in fact, all diseases, all illness are spiritual anyway. And Gigi, I know that you are a man of God, so on this subject, I want to take God's side out of the situation. We just want to talk about health advice.
You're always welcome to talk about God with me. There's not many places nowadays that you are welcome to talk about God. Robert, because of the hour and the number of callers, I'm going to have to cut you short. Don't be a stranger. Come back again earlier in the show. Let's go to Stephen in Glasgow. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hello there, George. Yes. Good time of day to you, whatever time of day it is for you. I just wanted to touch...
It's 9:45 at night and I'm nearly finished, so go ahead.
Good night to you then. Well, I just wanted to touch on the point you made earlier about the hate speech bill. I'm someone who's kind of historically always supported the SNP. I was pro-independence and whatnot. I still am. But I really did find myself virulently agreeing with you in the point about, I've watched, Rangers fans singing about wading in my blood. I have seen orange marches, almost every other month at least. At no point did it even occur to me to go, I want to curtail this. I want to do away with this. These people don't have the right to do this. I mean, basically, I think, you have the right to tell me that you are an intolerant bigot. I think it's excellent that you can reveal to me that you have a problem with my existence or religion or what have you. As far as it goes, I think that's actually a really good thing. Let all the poisons that lurk in the mud hatch out.
Why is the SNP pushing on with this, Stephen? They must know that it could only lead to the kind of trouble that we both already know that it will lead. They must know the breadth of the opposition to it. Is this Hamza Yousaf's personal pet project, or is this deeply embedded in the SNP?
I would argue for the latter. I think that there's a terrible kind of homogeneity around the left and the right now, where if you believe in a certain thing, if you're left or right, you have to buy into all the baggage. You have to buy into the whole thing, the trans thing that you were mentioning earlier. I mean,
that'll be the main thing, by the way. That would be the greatest number of calls to the police. I mean, you only got to look at social media to see it. J.K. Rowling, two West End theatre writers have just refused to appear on stage at a presentation with J.K. Rowling.
Yes, I saw that. And you have to ask yourself with these people. I mean, I know the show is successful, but you kind of go, who are these people? I mean, when you look at next to J.K. Rowling,
exactly. You'd think they'd be glad to make her acquaintance.
Yes, you think they'd be quite gracious, actually, and go, oh, my goodness, thank you for lending your support or whatever, And J.K. Rowling, incidentally, George, who was very, very recently, astonishingly recently, the great figure of the left and whatnot, is now suddenly absolutely ostracised.
She's been non-personed,
Yeah, absolutely.
She has been non-personed. The most successful person ever to come out of Scotland. Now, somebody paid for an ad outside a railway station which merely said, I heart love JK. And they took it down. The railway authority took it down.
What a dreadful Nazi statement to have the word love in it,
Exactly.
Absolutely appalling. Something should be done.
The number one crime rate will be on misgendering people. That is to say, not accepting that someone is a woman because they said they were.
Yes, and I don't know about you, George, but as someone who's been very, very left-wing all my life, I am ashamed of the left now. I really am.
Yeah, me too. It's a complete... a friend of mine, Paul Embury, has just produced a tremendous book looking at the ways in which the left fell out of love with the people. They lost confidence in the people and had to try and abolish them and appoint a new one. The descent of the left into identity politics, race, sex, gender, sexuality, orientation, and so on. They became the gods, where once the gods of the left were the fight against war, famine, pestilence, disease, bad housing, poor education, all the things that are now almost never talked about by the same people that are obsessing on these other identity politics issues. Stephen, you and I have got a lot in common. We need to get together. We need to get together.
So. It would be my honour. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you. You're a gentleman. Ronwell is in Chicago on the JFK anniversary. Ronwell, go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. I'm glad to speak with you there.
And you, sir. Go ahead.
Now, I think I know who killed JFK, I think it was the CIA and Mossad who killed John F. Kennedy. My theory is, I think they built a large secret nuclear weapons facility in Dimona. Once they are discovered, JFK was determined to stop them from developing their own nuclear weapons. He repeatedly pushed Ben-Gurion to allow weapon inspectors to do Dimona. 2 years later...
What evidence have you got of Israeli involvement in the killing of Jack Kennedy?
The Ben-Gurion used delaying tactics to avoid responding to JFK's request. He had to resign to further delay a response to the president after JFK gave an ultimatum.
One should avoid the temptation to automatically blame Israel for things with which there's no evidence connecting them. But there is abundant evidence of the Cuban exiles, their mafia partners, and the CIA itself. There is abundant evidence that they were in a conspiracy against Jack Kennedy. No evidence that any Israelis were similarly involved. Let's go to Brian in Glasgow. Go ahead, Brian.
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a good show, actually.
It has been very interesting.
Thank you.
George, I've seen you're all talking about the madness of the SNP and this hate legislation.
Yes.
I'm sure you'd agree it sort of get filtered into the media after the Telegraph article where they were interviewing sections of the Queen's Council in Scotland and also the Scottish Police Federation, if you remember that.
I do, yeah. The Faculty of Advocates, Scottish Police Federation, the Catholic Church, and many other social organisations are all against this measure.
Yeah. Okay, George, now, I contacted all these agencies after that to rub it in because it's already a matter of documentation. In fact, maybe when you come up to campaign and the broader scale of these events, these are relevant. I created documents interacting with Police Scotland over the efficacy, i.e. directly, that the hate legislation, family law and also child legislation is all incompatible with ECHR, and therefore legislation is fraudulent at the point where it sought royal assent. Because you're asked to declare whether the bill is compliant with ECHR. They don't have legal advice. You also see this tying in, and I've sent this off to my contact in Police Scotland about the fact that the inquiry into Alex Salmond, the issue of legal advice, and the Chief Prosecutor's got a conflict of interest in that because the separation of powers. But I already pointed out that his wife is already a judge when his organisation prosecutes. There is so many issues that SNP and previous, and George, it brings to this point about being a legislator. I want to go on the basis of madness, the SNP. Well, we already bought into madness. Fatherhood was taken out of natural law 142 years ago, and not having fatherhood in natural law means the law does not reflect humanity. Until that's discussed with QCs, we will not get an honest about the rule of law that's been abused, which does not benefit us all.
Okay, Brian, many thanks for that. The hour is so late, I must race on. Alan says Britain will reach a deal with the EU. The thing is that deal will be done under EU terms, just like the trade agreement between the UK and Canada. Nothing will have changed. Years of uncertainty, division and money wasted. And Richard says, George, what are you talking about? Margaret Thatcher was the best Prime Minister we've ever had and probably we're ever going to have. She wouldn't stand for the current political climate like you, but no need for what you said about her. And I hope you will apologise live on air. Sorry to disappoint you, Richard. Alfie says, how can you be against a bill intended to reduce hate speech? Because it's a bill that will increase hate, Alfie. Georgie says, as we both know, COVID-19 is serious. My workmate died of it on the first wave. He was a nurse. He was terrified. And this guy in Hull tarnishes his memory. And Barbara says, on the Priti Patel affair, If you get away with a little bit of bullying, it doesn't stop there. Remember, Pretty is a woman who wanted to bring back the death penalty. Yep, Pretty in character, she certainly is not. Here's Kurt in Germany on the US election. Kurt, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I'm a great admirer of you because you interviewed Saddam Hussein in the last time he was there. I've I'm a bit nervous, I'm sorry.
It's all right, take your time.
There is a rule of law and a rule of the media, and they are building up a case, and everybody says they have no proof. My question is, or my remark is, how much fraud is acceptable? I listened to what the governor of Georgia said. He said that they had these recount of votes, but they changed the rules. For example, in Michigan, that you don't have to compare the signatures. So what the Democrats did, they changed the voting laws, and that's not fraud, but is that allowed according to the federal law? So all these cases finally will end up at the Supreme Court. So this case, or this whole thing, finally will end up at the Supreme Court. And when you read the Constitution, what Hamilton says, it's not by incident that there is a time between the election in November and the time when the council,
the inauguration,
the electoral college in December, because everything has to be investigated, and by now Biden has not 270 electoral votes, and everybody speaks about that he is the president-elect and the office of the president-elect, but that is not so, and you know that because Biden doesn't start proceedings, because when he does it, he will lose it. Just this weekend, it's very silent. So
I'm not sure he knows where he is. Kurt, thanks for the call. I need to go because there's a legend on the line. It's the lovely Norma in Bristol with a recommendation. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Norman Baker was talking about these famous groups on his radio program, and it was funny because I wanted to just talk about the punk era.
That's a good idea, actually. We haven't done that.
No, well, I saw this film this afternoon about Ian Drury's life. It was pretty complex, but he was a unique entertainer, basically.
He was, absolutely. I was a big fan of his.
Well, yeah. He brought back... I had two tearaway sons at the time, teenagers, and it brought back these memories about 40 years ago, I think. But his rhythm and the fact that there was no hypocrisy in him, it was a bit violent, but, he was sad, and he was great in lots of ways.
Well, he was always threatening to hit you with his rhythm stick.
Yeah, I know.
At least he did it with tongue-in-cheek, at least I hope that's what it was. But the punk era was another, just like the Beatles and the Mersey beat phenomenon and so on, it was another British invention. It was an expression of working class culture in Britain. It never appealed to me. I was a mod, so seeing someone with safety pins in their nose and wearing bin bags was never going to appeal to me. But when you think back at some of the acts and some of the energy, if you like, that there was in the punk era, it does deserve a discussion on the mother of all talk shows. We'll do that, Norma. Last word to you.
It just brought out the rebellion in me because I've had a very hard week. I've been very tense, and I thought, oh, good old Ian Drury,
Well, I'll tell you what, they could have played God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols at the end of last night's episode of The Crown, and the whole country, by and large, would have been cheering it. If you if you watch The Crown, if even half of it is true, it's frankly astounding that we've still got a monarchy at all. And I'm not sure that Prince Charles is going to do the institution much good. He'd be better skipping it and handing it over to Prince William if they want to maintain the institution. Norma, thanks as always. A brilliant suggestion. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week. Same time, same place. Good night.